What's up, everybody? My name is Mark Anthony Joe, and welcome back to the Good Omen Podcast. This is a special episode. I'm excited for it, kind of. We've got a special guest, very special guest, Grace, the first guest to be on the show twice.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's worth something. Yeah, it's gonna be a good episode. I haven't. Grace is here today to interview me, and we're gonna just work through my story. You know, I'll be the guest on the show today, and truthfully, I haven't shared my story in a while. To be honest, when I for a few years, when I became very active on social media, and I've done a little bit of podcasting, both my own podcasts and been guests on other podcasts. I used to talk about my story a lot. I used to talk about some of the experiences that I have a lot. But since I've at a certain point, you kind of get bored with your own story. I think there's a place for it, and I think that I know that I've learned so much over the years. I've gained an invaluable perspective on life and on people and on the world just through some of the things that I've gone through and overcome. And it is my hope and it's my prayer that you all receive the same value that I've received, and that if nothing else, you guys enjoy just sort of learning a little bit more about me. And before we get started, I do want to remind you that we really, really, really appreciate it if you guys just take a moment to leave a rating for the show. If you're listening on audio, so Spotify or Apple Podcasts, it literally only takes 2 seconds. Literally, you just press leave a rating, and then you press the number of stars you'd like to leave. And you're done. That's it. 2 seconds later, you're done. If you're watching on YouTube, please make sure you're subscribed. Like the video, subscribe. I don't know how the algorithm works on there, but truthfully, we just do the show. Like, I fund this show myself, and we do it. I guess it's fair to say Jack contributes too, but we do it just because we're mission oriented. We really think that we believe in what we're doing. We believe in the values that we are propagating here in our community in St. Louis, and we really hope to contribute to other people's lives in a positive way through this platform. So we appreciate it when you share the show, but even if you don't share it, just leaving a rating is a simple thing you can do to help us move the mission forward. So thank you, guys, and without further ado...
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pass the baton.
All right. Hey, guys. How's it going? It's Grace. If you're not watching, what's up?
First of all, if you're not watching, what are you doing?
If you're not watching,
you gotta watch it.
You should check us out. Actually, what's really cool, and I've never seen, this is kudos to you, Jack, because I've never seen another podcast other than Joe Rogan's where you can actually watch in the Spotify app. That is just so cool. I don't know how you figured out how to do that, but that is just so cool. So that's where I watch.
He's a professional.
He is. Hire him. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm not. Actually, if you need podcasting or producing needs, even if you're not in St. Louis, Jack's a good guy to go to. But anyway, so check it out. It's so cool. I love watching Spotify. YouTube's also great. I actually was talking to Jack earlier today about how valuable it would be if Mark could sit down and do an episode and share a little more about his story. And I was thinking back to myself, obviously, Mark and I have been together for nearly 4 years. It'll be 4 years in June. And I was thinking back about like if he's ever done a full sit-down episode on his own platform about all of the different things that he's been through, which obviously 4 years in, I'm well acquainted with a lot of the things that he's been through. So I thought it could be kind of a cool opportunity for me to, draw out some different answers and some different things and really just to lay out a baseline understanding of who Mark is. And it's so funny because I was joking with Mark today that I was going to open the podcast by saying, this is Mark Joe. He's an onion. He has many layers, because that is what he told me. I can't remember if it was like our first or second date, but I was like, wow,
I was like, I'm like Shrek.
Yes, you did say that. You literally quoted Shrek.
Yeah.
But it's been very true. And every day I learn more about you. And a lot of times, honestly, I'm like very shocked and sad about like some of the experiences that you've been through, which I know is never the intention that you have when sharing them to make me or anybody else feel bad. But I just think it's very powerful to know some of the things that you've gone through and who you are today in comparison. And like, you have talked a lot about different parts of your story on different podcasts here and there, and different, platforms and in different contexts. But I don't think like chronologically you've ever necessarily sat down and gone through like, this is where I started. Especially like, you talk a lot about prison, and like, I think that's interesting. Like, you learn most of your valued stuff from prison, but like, there's so much that happened in your life before that too, and like so much that went into the reason of why you ended up in prison in the first place that I feel like is important context. Because sometimes I feel like people just are like, oh, he went to prison, he's a bad man jamma. Which there's so much missing context there. But
to be fair, I only talk about prison. I think I talk about prison the most because that's when I changed.
Yeah, no, and it's like, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I just feel like, there's a lot more to you than like just that. That is a really important pivotal moment in your life. But like, there's so many other places where people can relate to through the different experiences that you've been through. And, like, not everybody can relate to prison, but you were a foster kid. Some people can relate to having a broken home, or like single parents, or like, despondent parent, just different scenarios. So I want to start, I kind of like want to start when you're a kid, like I feel like it's kind of, I don't know. When I was in school, my teachers would always say, like, if you're writing a biography, never start with like, on December 2nd, 1992, Mark Joe was born. But I really do feel like that's valuable in your case, because so much happened in your life before you're even born to you and your twin brother. So if you want to start there a little bit.
Yeah. Well, the truth is, a lot of my childhood, I don't remember a lot of my childhood. Psychologists would say that, somebody who's gone through it's normal for somebody who's gone through a lot of trauma to suppress those memories. It's like, it can be like they didn't even happen. And it's interesting because like, seriously, like, up until I was probably 22 years old, like, I didn't remember a single thing. I had one memory from 0 to 11 years old. And then I was like 11. That's when my life started. But since then, since going on like, just diving into like personal development and spirituality and digging through a lot of my past traumas and like really journaling a lot and meditating, it sort of unlocked a lot of earlier memories in my life, which is cool. But another reason why I might not remember all of it is my parents. Throughout the course of this podcast, I'll refer to, like, when I say my parents, I'm actually talking about my foster parents. That's who I refer to as my parents. My biological parents, I'll say like my mom, and you guys will be able to follow along. But yeah, my foster parents, for all intents and purposes, are my parents. But my parents told me that my mom, that when I finally came to them permanently, which was when I was 11, that I was like a zombie because my mom had me on so many psych meds, and it wasn't necessarily that I had any issues. It was my mom was like on the welfare system, and so like apparently like you get more money for children that have disabilities, and so she would take me around from doctor to doctor to doctor and have me diagnosed with like anxiety or ADHD or whatever, and I'd be taking all these medications for something that I didn't even have. And so I was like a zombie, she said, which is crazy. But I also suspect that that is part of the reason why I don't remember much. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so my parents were just in town. My parents were just in town not long ago. How long ago was it that they were here?
It's been a minute.
Yeah, I don't know. I say just in town. This is why my parents only see me once a year.
Yeah.
But anyway, it felt like they were just in town, and my mom shared something with me that I didn't know and that I had never heard. But she said, Marky, how we first got you was your mom had abandoned you and your twin brother in an apartment, like basically a crack house, like an abandoned apartment. When you were 15 months old, she abandoned you in this apartment, and the only reason that anybody found you was because you guys had been crying for like 3 or 4 days, and somebody finally went and poked their head in and saw 2 little brown boys in there butt naked, no clothes, no food, no bottle, and we had like caked on feces on our body because we were just, we were there for days and we had been like pooping and peeing on ourselves. And she said the apartment was so bad that that they had to clean the tub just to put us in the tub and clean us because we were so dirty that they didn't want to put us in the car and bring us back to the center. So,
and you were how old at this point?
15 months old. So they cleaned the tub, cleaned us, then brought us back. And she said, when we got you, they called us. And when we got you, it was just 2 babies. There was no diapers, no diaper bag, no nothing. 2 babies wearing medium-sized adult T-shirts, white T-shirts, like dresses. And it was because that's all they had at the shelter or wherever they brought us back to. And
this was in New York, right?
Yeah, I'm from New York. Yeah, I never knew that. I never knew that that's how that day went down. And I just found that out just recently. And so somehow that was not the day that my foster parents actually got permanent custody of us. So
which blows my mind.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like to me, I mean, because you went back and forth to your foster parents and your biological mom
all the way till I was 11 years old.
Until you were 11. Mm-hmm. And like, what would the state deem, like what was the determining factor that your biological mom was like fit to care for you again after that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, would she get clean? Would she?
Yeah. I mean, from what I understand, she would go in and out of rehab. She'd go in and out of jail. Anyway, I don't know. Somehow we ended up back with my mom. And so, after that, I think it was when I was like 2, we moved to Florida. It could be later. My timeline is generally kind of squirrely just because I don't remember stuff. Yeah. But we moved to Florida, and I think that was like my mom's way of like escaping. Like she was just trying to get away from all of her drug addict friends and just start new. And a lot of addicts think like that. They just need to go somewhere, get away from the social circle that keeps pulling them into the lifestyle. My father disappeared almost immediately. Like at that point, my father was out of the picture. And so we moved to Florida, and it wasn't just us. It was my mom, my older sister. I have an older sister, Teresa, my younger sister, Katie, and then my twin brother, Matt. And we go down there, and all I remember from actually, man, there's a core memory that I have had. And this one didn't come to me recently. I've had it for a long time. I just never talked about it. I never wanted anybody to know about it. It's probably the thing in my story that I have been most hesitant to share with people. It's almost like I'm ashamed of it. I don't know why. And I've certainly never shared it on a podcast before, but so there's a core memory from right before we went to Florida. So it must have been later. It was definitely later than 2. We must have been 4 or 5 by the time I went to Florida. But I was around 4 or 5 years old, and again in like a shady apartment, and I remember, like, long story short, I remember there was this other little girl there who maybe must have been like my age, and a white guy, and I don't know who that guy was because my dad is black, but like this white guy, and my mom was not there, and it was just me and this young girl, and basically he had us like play like we were having sex, like, and as we did that, like, he just stood there and masturbated, like looking at us, and I just, it's you know, it's disgusting, but the vivid memory was like him like watching me, like having me watch him ejaculate, you know, and you know, I was molested. That's what it was, and I don't know where my mom was, and I don't know who that little girl was, but to this day, I know, like, that has affected who I've become in a big way, and why I have such strong opinions about like predatory behavior by adults, and why I don't know, I have very low tolerance for sympathizers of like pedophiles and perverts, and I also feel really strongly about women having children that, you know, maybe shouldn't be having children. You know, it's just, and that one can go either way, but it's, you know, because I basically was abandoned, and things like that can happen when you just don't take care of your kids. And so anyway, that was right before we left, and that was in New York still. That was right before we left, and then we went to Florida. My mom moves us to Florida. When we were in Florida, we were living in like these women's and children's shelters. We didn't know anybody down there. Like, we were literally living in shelters. And I can remember that. We were like in the Clearwater, Largo area, and then eventually my mom got an apartment. And this is funny. I haven't thought about this stuff in so long. Me and my brother got us kicked out of like several apartment buildings.
You did?
Because we were so bad. We were so bad. We would just, you know, just twins and inseparable. And mind you, like, I was like, even at this time, they called me Marky Peanut when I was a kid because I was like malnourished. Like, I was so little. Like, my mom told me, she thinks that my foster mom, pretty sure I had rickets. Like, my bones were weak. Like, I was just frail because I just didn't eat much. And
there's a hypothesis that or a theory that your brother was stealing your bottles.
Yeah, there is a theory. That's the joke, because my brother, we're twins, but he's like literally 30 pounds heavier than me, you know, 2 inches taller. And the theory is that Matt was stealing all my milk as a baby. But like, it just, for whatever reason, maybe I wasn't eating because I was stressed out. Who knows? But so we go to Florida, and yeah, I remember we got enrolled. I went to Seminole Elementary School in Florida, right? It's in like Seminole, Florida, which is like the Largo, St. Pete area. And we were in these like low-income apartments that are still there. Actually, the last time I was in Florida, I drove by. Buena Vista was one of them, I remember. But so Matt and I would do these things. Like, we would just like I remember in elementary school, I got suspended because we like jumped this kid. Yeah, I can vividly remember it. The kid had like big glasses, but he was much bigger than me, and he would pick on me. And so every time somebody would pick on me and Matt would end up jumping them. And so, yeah, I mean, we do stuff like that. We, walk around our apartment complex with, and just like bully kids and
Which is all an outward projection of you guys just not receiving the love that you need at home.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good perspective on it.
I'm not excusing bullies, but like when you get down to the root issue, a lot of these kids are not receiving something, like a need is not being met in some area of their life, whether that be by a parent or a sibling or whatever. So
yeah, and one of the times we got kicked out of the apartments was because Matt and I went up on you could climb up on, I don't know how we got up on the roof, because it's like, a building with tons of apartments, 3 levels high, and we were on the roof throwing rocks at windows and just breaking window, and then we came home. We were just having fun, and then we came home, and like my mom, somebody saw us, and it got back, and we got kicked out. We got evicted.
Wow.
Yeah, so we were bad. And anyway, so I don't think that much significant to this story happened while we were in Florida. But I will say that when we were 10, because I did fast forward, okay, from New York to Florida, and there was a lot of back and forth between my mom and the foster family. Which
your foster family was back in New York, so every time
Yeah, no, there wasn't. Once we went to Florida, and that's why I said we must have went to Florida later. It must have been when I was like 5 years old that we went to Florida, because it was for the first like 5 years. We were back and forth. And then Laura and Dennis always stayed in contact, though, which is my parents. And then when we were 10, Matt was just like, hey, Ma, I want to go live with Laura and Dennis. And my mom, just being the type of mom that she was just like, all right, and packed his bags and sent him to Laura and Dennis. And Laura and Dennis were happy to have him. And that was the first time in our lives that we had ever been separated. Like, we had never had anything constant. Like, we were ripped from this family to this family, from this home to this home. And, my sister even would cycle in and out because we have different biological fathers. So like they would go. So the only constant that we had both ever had was each other. And so it was a big deal, it stressed me out a lot, but like I had this deep, fierce loyalty to my mom. Like they say this about like children of addicts, like you mature way faster than you're supposed to, and then you kind of become like the adult in the relationship, and you feel responsible for the parent who's the addict.
Yeah, but not only that, like your dad wasn't in the picture.
No, he wasn't.
I feel like it's kind of a natural inclination for someone to try to assume that role of leadership.
Yeah, so I felt really responsible for my mom and for my sisters, even at 10 years old, and so there was no chance I was not going anywhere. And so my mom one day told me that we were going to go visit Matt. We were going to go on vacation. She's like, yeah, we're going to go see your brother, go see Laura and Dennis. And I was like so excited. I was so excited to take a vacation. And so we packed our bags and we got on a plane and we flew to New York. And when we got there, we got in this taxi because that's how old I am. We got in this taxi, and taxi took us to this building, and I knew it was kind of on the way to Laura and Dennis's because I knew I used to live there, and then we stopped at this building, and we go inside, and I'm like just excited to be there, and my mom like sits me down on this bench, and she's like, hey, wait right here, I'll be right back, and she never came back that day. She just like left me sitting there on that bench, and hour, 2 hours, I don't know how much time passed, but the next thing I know, Laura and Dennis are coming out, and they're like, hey, you're going home with us today, and I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Where's my mom? I'm not going nowhere. And so long. What I found out later as an adult is that day, that was the family court building that we were at. And we took a vacation. The vacation was so that we could make a court date. And that was the day that the court was going to decide once and for all who was going to have legal guardianship of the twins. But essentially the reason why this came up was because that being the first time that we had ever been separated, the family court was like, hey, listen, they are the only thing that they've had. So we don't want them to be separate. So wherever one of them lives, they both need to live. And there was a debate, right? Because I wanted to stay with my mom and Matt wanted to stay with Laura and Dennis. And so the court decided. And so, yeah, they had to, that, when I said earlier, like how one of my first memories was when I was like 11, that was the first memory, was that whole thing. What I vividly remember is they had to like carry me by my arms and my legs. Like somebody will get one leg, another person they had to carry me to their car because I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go anywhere. I wanted to stay on that bench and wait for my mom to come back. And so, yeah, it was, as you can imagine, with that being the transition of guardianship, it going down like that, I was not receptive at all to my new parents. Like, I'm not calling you mom. Like, you're not my mom. I'm not, I was a little bit more receptive to dad because I never had a dad. Mm-hmm. So, like, you didn't, like, replace anybody that I was loyal to. But, like, my mom and I, oh, my gosh, we had such a toxic relationship. I mean, because I just wouldn't have it. I was so loyal to my mom. And
you're stubborn now. I cannot even imagine.
I'm trying to tell you
how stubborn you were then.
I was not having it. And so, and then I was just so traumatized by the whole thing. I have these deep abandonment issues because my mom, like, I'm like, that's all I felt.
Yeah, that'll mess a kid up.
Like, even if your mom, the person that's supposed to love you long after everyone else stops, was willing to just leave you on the side of the road like a bag of trash, like, I think as I worked through it as an adult, I just really was convinced that I didn't deserve to be loved. Like, I wasn't going to let anybody in. One, because I was like, sure, that if I let you in, you're just going to abandon me anyway. Or you're just going to hurt me anyway. So I wouldn't let anybody in. And then also, like, I just rejected love because I really didn't feel worthy of it. Like, I'm like, even my mom threw me away. So, like, just leave me alone. Yeah. And so it led to me being a very angry, very reactive, very violent. Not violent in, like, a weapon sense, but I used to fight so much. I would swing on anybody, for real. And, like, my parents, I tried to throw a chair at a teacher once. Wow. Like, I mean, yeah, I was just very angry and violent.
Which, like, that, to me, like, man, I just, my heart. Like, I just have a heart for every kid. Like, I try to see the best in people. And, like, I just see kids that act out. And I see kids that, like, are hurting. And I just know, like, especially after, like, being with you and knowing what you've gone through, like, yes, there's a certain amount of accountability, but, like, oh my gosh, those kids, they just are going through things that, like, can't even imagine and they won't talk about. And it's like, I always wonder, like, what did you really need in that moment? Like, what could have made a difference for you? 'Cause, like, I mean, now you're like, and you've talked about it before in the sense of, like, discipline, like, sometimes you needed somebody to discipline you, sometimes you needed this, that, or the other thing, but a lot of times that was later in life. And, like, after you were, like, consciously making, like, those decisions. And not that you weren't consciously making them, but when you're 11, 12 years old, like, you're like only acting based on the experiences that you've had. And, like, I'm just curious your, like, opinion on what you think would have helped you in that scenario, because
I don't think that anything can. I mean, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, a strong male role model, somebody to look up to. I don't know, but I never had that. And I don't know, somebody to pour into you. Like, it's just, I don't think it's that complicated. Like, I think, you know, you just need somebody to pour into you. But my parents, in their defense, were pouring into me. Mm-hmm. They tried very hard. My mom was a full-time mom, so she never missed a sports game. She never, like, it was, you know, she was there awesome. All the time. Yeah. Like, when we, you know, so sometimes people can pour into you and it just doesn't matter. I think some people can be so psychologically beat down mm-hmm. that, like, it's very difficult, and nobody can lower that defense system but them. Mm-hmm. And that was me. So yeah, I mean, I moved back to New York when I'm 11, and it's interesting because when I went from, like, living in low income, I don't want to say, you know, like, in poor areas around a diverse group of people, to living in a rural area with my foster parents. When we first started going to school, we were in 5th grade at the time, and me and my brothers were the only black kids in the whole school district. Like, it was crazy. And so to go from our former environment to that environment, at the time, I didn't think anything of it, but as we got into 5th grade and then middle school and then sports and all that, I really started to notice, you know, just that we were different, and that everybody knew we were different. Yeah. So I can actually vividly remember, you know what? I'm going to tell a funny story about my big brother, Travis. So
wait, I feel like you have to introduce, because you haven't talked
I'm about
Travis.
to. Yeah, okay. I'm about to. So, but before I do, I have to give some context. So when my foster parents, we were not the only children that my foster parents fostered. They had one biological son. His name is Travis, and he was the oldest in the house. And then
7 years older than you?
6, 7, something like that. So he was the oldest, and then they also had my little brother Brett, who's a foster child as well, and they also had another foster child, Ryan, who he didn't spend his whole childhood there, but he was there when I went, and so
which, like, just shout out to your parents. How cool that they opened up their home
out here saving lives
to 4 boys. I mean, well, they had 5 boys in their house at one point. That is crazy.
In fact, it's what's even crazier is that, like, I look back now that I'm an adult and I, like, make my own money and I pay my own bills. I have no idea how my dad was it was a single income mm-hmm. household. Yeah. And my dad worked at a chemical plant for GE since he was, like, 18 years old, and he supported 5 boys and his wife on, like, $60,000 a year. Like, how? He was supporting everybody on this, like, I don't know, 50, 60 grand. I'm just guessing. I know now that how much my dad has never made, mm-hmm. which is crazy to me. But I'm thinking, okay, this is 15 years ago or more. No, this is 20 years ago. So, like, I know my dad wasn't making that money. And so basically we were poor, but they never let us feel like we were poor. Yeah. It's crazy. And I could tell a million stories about, like, examples of that. Like, we would play a sport every season. Mm-hmm. We play AAU or travel leagues when sport's not in season. Christmas, oh my Lanta, Christmas at our house was like magic. We would go to sleep at night on Christmas Eve, and there would be, like 6 presents around the tree for each. We would come down in the morning, and it would look like a snow globe exploded in the house, and it would just be presents everywhere stacked on everything. It was, so they never let us feel that. It never occurred to me until I came home from prison. At 25, did my dad say, because I got a job opportunity, and I was like, hey, they say I could make up to like 80 grand in my first year. And my dad started crying. He said, I never made that in my life. Think about that.
That's going to make me cry. Gosh.
Think about that. And
so awesome.
I cried right when he said that. Because I'm like,
man.
What? And then I started flashing back to all that they did for us. My dad, my whole life has driven these beat up cars. No, for real. Like, let me tell you about this car.
Man.
My dad just got rid of it. He might be still driving it. He has a Honda Accord with 330,000 miles on it. This man has I've seen it. This man has put a trailer hitch on his Honda Accord and towed a trailer behind it. Like, he's
a savage.
The king. He is MacGyver to the max.
He is.
But and he would buy these cars for like $400 and then drive them for 4 years, but he always did that. And he claimed that he just didn't mind it. But now I know, we were poor. We were, not really. We were middle class. But when you're middle class with 5 boys in a single house, you're poor. So anyway, back to my story. So Travis, when I actually arrived, I rejected my parents. I pretty much rejected everybody except for Travis. For whatever reason, Travis was somebody that I really looked up to. I kind of warmed up to him immediately. And maybe it's because I never had a male figure, an older male figure that I could trust or I would let in. And so that was my guy, and I could tell a million stories about how amazing Travis is, but we were in this school district and in this rural area, and we were hearing the N-word and just some what the word racist gets tossed around so much today that 20 years ago what racism looked like was real racism. It was it was bad. It was bad. Nowadays, if you make a joke about me liking watermelon and it being my favorite fruit, you're racist. No, back then it was get out of our town, nigger, and people would pick fights with me. And one day my little brother, man, he was
such a cute kid.
He is the cutest kid you will ever see. He had these thick ass glasses. I mean, thick.
Which is so funny because he has a sweet little son now, our nephew,
who also has
looks
thick
exactly
glasses.
like him and has thick glasses.
And so Brett was walking home from school. We would walk to and from school a lot because we lived less than a mile from it. And there was this this white trash kind of corner store in our town. There was 2 corner stores. One was Cumberland Farms, which was the mainstream thing. And then one was it was called Jiffy Mart.
Red flag number 1.
Yeah. And so, but we couldn't get home without walking past it. And so Brett was walking. Apparently there was a couple grown men that were hanging out at the pizza spot that was attached to the Jiffy Mart that were harassing Brett, saying things get out of our town, nigger, da 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 da. And
how can you say that to a child?
A child at the time, Brett had to
How
been
could you say that to anybody?
Brett had to been 10 or 11, maybe 12. I don't know, but he was a child, and so Brett came home crying, and I remember Travis heard it, got in his car. He had this old Toyota Tacoma. It was his pride and joy. But he got in his car, peels out of the driveway, goes up by himself, okay? And mind you, Travis is maybe 19 at the time, 20. I don't know. He's a young man. He goes down there, and he comes back I don't know, an hour later. Apparently what happened that day was he goes down there, pulls in, which one of you, beats up both of the guys, and then comes back and act like nothing happened. But the only reason we know is because it was a small town. Everybody know what happened. And yeah, I don't know. So that's Travis. Travis was crazy. But that's the type of stuff that we would deal with. And this is a very controversial, I guess I would call it an opinion of mine. But I think I have very sharp survival skills. And so
elaborate on that.
I'm about to.
Okay.
So it occurred to me at a young age, I had to be in 9th grade at this time, that a lot of these kids had never even seen they've seen them, but a lot of these kids had never interacted with a black person before, never in their life, and we're in high school, right? And so the only idea of what black people were like was an idea that had been propagated by the media, right? So when you see black people in movies or in music videos or rappers or athletes, pop culture depicts black people one way. And so it occurred to me that that's how they expected us to be. And it's so crazy because for a split second, I caught myself in frustration being like, well, screw it. That's just how I'll be. But I knew that's not who I was. And so what I mean when I say I have really sharp survival skills is that I knew at that age that there was no way that I could convince these kids to not have these preconceived ideas about me. There was no way that I could explain to you that I'm a kid just like you, that I had to actually assimilate, for lack of a better word. I had to just be a normal kid, but also one of them, for them to realize that, oh, Mark's just like us. He likes sports. I like sports. He likes to talk to girls. I like to talk to girls. He likes to play video games. I like to play video games. He plays paintball. I like to play paintball. And so I rejected the black culture that pop culture promotes. I rejected it. I was, I'd listen to the music and stuff like that, but up until that point, I was sagging my pants, and I would think about this.
I've seen a picture of you in the little suspenders.
Think about this. I wear a medium right now. I'm this is the size I've been since I was an adult. I wear a size medium shirt. I was wearing larges and extra larges as a 14-year-old kid. I was wearing this baggy clothes, and
did you do that because you wanted to, or did you do that because you were trying to fit?
I think my mom used to dress us like that. My mom was kind of, she lived in those types of environments that pop culture often promotes, right? And so I started buying different clothes. I started dressing like the kids around me dressed. I stopped using.
Did you feel like that was because you had to, though, or did
I
you
remember
want to?
No, I remember consciously doing it, and it was just a decision. I didn't feel like it was costing me anything. It wasn't costing me my identity. It wasn't. And then I just started buying different clothes. I started speaking differently. My biological mom uses a lot of slang. She's like, "Oh, that's bussin'," when we're talking about food, or, "Oh, that's slamming," or I don't know. She uses a lot of Southern slang. And so I let some of that stuff go. And before you knew it, I swear, I can think of a specific kid right now that was maybe he was the ringleader of the racist kids. There was this little neighborhood. There's all white trash, and they hated black kids. And so, but the reason why I'm thinking of him, I've fought this kid several times, never lost.
I was gonna say, and one every time. No,
But I can actually think of him specifically. By the time I graduated high school, so that was freshman year. By the time I graduated high school, that kid, we were friends, me and that kid. And I think in retrospect, what happened was these kids, either their parents or their environment told them what black people were like, and they believed it. And they had these, and they showed up as if we were that. Yeah. But when you just go in, you can't. Basically, this is a major life lesson that I learned from this whole experience, is that you can't reason somebody away from a deeply held belief like that, like black people are criminals or black people are menaces to society. You have to show up differently, and you have to also withstand the judgment. You have to just endure it, and the attacks and the accusations and the snarky comments, and you have to endure it and keep showing up differently anyway, because eventually, as you keep showing up, there's an undeniable reality that you are not the way that they think that you are. And this is why I say it's a very controversial opinion of mine, but like, I think that sometimes with black culture, because I feel really strong, I want to help the black community specifically. I have for a long time. I come from that community, and I think that its culture really, really, really dooms children from a young age, because they value different things than society values, and they promote behavior that is counterproductive. There's not a strong family unit in poor black neighborhoods. Like, just I could go down the list. And so I really, really want to help that community. One, because I came from it, and two, because those kids are so smart and so capable, and they have so much potential. But they don't like to hear this. But like, you have to let go of this culture that is keeping you. It's holding you hostage in life. It is. And if you want, it's not, I don't think that it's the rest of society's duty to like look past it. Like, of course, if you like speak like an idiot, then of course people are going to assume that you're an idiot. Like, if you act belligerently in public or disrespectfully, of course people are not going to want to be around you. Like, they're not going to want you in their establishment. Like, I think there's like there is something to be said about like having a diverse cultural reality in our country and accepting that not everybody lives the same way. But there's also something to be said about like having a little bit of self-awareness and seeing yourself and being like, would I want to be around me? If I live differently than I do. But that goes
for anyone.
Anyone, of course. Like, me and you talk, and there's certain cultures that we've observed that they completely lack.
I just mean, like, sorry to interrupt you, but I just mean, like, would I want to be around, like, you could convey that, like, or use that, like, sentiment in any regard. Like, would you want to be my friend? Would you want to be, like, my business partner? Would you want to, be my husband? Like, whatever. I feel like that sentiment carries. Yeah. But what I want to kind of go back to is like, I think that's why it's so important to have to basically have, like, as a parent, I think about it from like, I'm not a parent yet, but I think about it as like, how do I want to raise my children? And I think it's so important to expose your kids to all sorts of different types of people and places and, just experiences, so that you don't raise these kids with this one-sided, one-dimensional view of what a specific group or
of course that's ideal, but like the reality is, in almost every area of my life, and this has pulled me out of some low spots, is I always ask myself the question, well, what can I do? You know what I mean? Like, what role am I playing in this situation? Even as a 14-year-old kid, it was like, well, is what they're saying about me true? And I was showing up as if it was true. Well, then why can I be mad? If I'm showing up like a little gangster and they're treating me like I'm some hood rat. Like, yeah, like that's how else are they supposed to treat me? That's exactly who I'm presenting myself as, and so there's a term for what I'm talking about, and people on the internet hate it. What black people specifically, these scholar types, they hate it when I talk about this because they're so loyal to the black culture. Well, I'm sorry, but the black culture is leading us to being the most highly imprisoned ethnic group in America. I mean, look at our communities. They're crumbling. Look at our, the way that our children are being raised. Look at the number of single-parent households we have. That's what black culture is doing to us, And so, anyway, so I digress. But that's what I did. I resorted to saying, well, let me see if I live and show up and dress and talk a little bit more like these people do, if they'll accept me. And so for whatever reason, I did that, and they did. And Matt and I both, like, we were always on the same page. And so we became like the most popular kids in our high school, like without question. Everybody knew us, mainly because we were the only black kids. We were really good at sports. We were good looking, so all the girls liked us. And in high school, we were just we still are two completely different personalities. Matt was like,
so funny because like people always ask me like, oh, is it weird for you like dating an identical twin? Which like that is always such a weird question to me because like they're two completely separate people, but they like literally could not be more polar opposite in terms of like, so like I feel like your personalities are so different that it makes you physically look different, even though like you're identical. Like you're just so
different,
opposite. And like I think people when they first meet you two together are like, wow, they look the same, how do you tell them apart? And then like they get to know you for a few days and they're like, oh my gosh, like they could not be more different.
I don't know. We were even at that young age. Matt was like he just embraced the popularity. Like he was just Mr. Popular. He was a jock. He played on a football team, and he was the guy. Varsity football as a freshman, and starting. He was really good, and so he would hang with all the jocks and the cool kids, and then meanwhile I would just like hang out in like the art room. Like I would like sneak around and skip class. I would sneak up to the roof of our high school and smoke weed. It's crazy.
No, I could never. You and I, if we were the same age and crossed paths in high school,
you would have hated me.
I would have you would have been like, I would have looked at you with so much judgment.
But I was like popular, and I just didn't want it. I didn't want the popularity, so I would just kind of shrunk into the background. But life, generally speaking, and I would fight a lot, but generally speaking, life started to get better. I was always very good at school. Matt and I both. We would get great grades. We were both really good. I got pulled up to varsity at the end of my freshman season. So like I'm on varsity basketball, he's on varsity football as freshman. So we were always hanging out with older kids because it's mostly seniors, juniors and seniors that are on varsity. So our friend group was like the cool older kids, and it was great. Life started to get better. It started to be normal. At home, it still wasn't normal. Like I was still rejecting my parents. Like there was several times where like I would have like physical altercations with like my parents. They'd call the police on me. The state troopers would come and take me out of the house and sit me down and be like, what's going on? And I was just broken. And so anyway, I poured everything into basketball. I really had a lot of fun playing that. I played just about every sport through high school. I wrestled for a season.
You wrestled?
No, I didn't. That was when I was really young. So that was maybe elementary school. But from middle school on, I played tennis for one season. I played soccer for a season. I would run casually, but never like run track. And then I played basketball. I played football for one season, but really basketball was like my constant. And I really loved it. And then, and so, like I said, things were getting normal. Things were going good. And then when I was 16, I was in 10th grade. My brother died. My big brother, Travis. He was this just a man's man. You know, it's crazy. It was crazy. I could tell you about Travis and forever, but at this time he was working out. He was jacked. And what happened was he hurt his shoulder, and of course, I think this is like right after Obamacare got implemented.
Get back to the story.
But it was 2009. Okay, but anyway, Travis hurt his shoulder lifting weights, and he went to the doctor and I think he tore his rotator cuff is what it was, and he went to the doctor and they prescribed him some pain meds, and he didn't have any insurance, and so like when the prescription ran out, like he just like turned to buying that stuff on the street to manage because he couldn't pay for the surgery, and he also didn't have any insurance to get prescription. So
and he was working a blue collar job at this point.
I can't remember what he was doing for work, but
it's not super relevant. I just was thinking in terms of like him needing his shoulder for his job.
No, I can't remember what he was doing, but anyway, he turned to the streets and like literally in a matter of months, like he was dead. He overdosed on opiates. And man, it was like, I remember the night that we got the call, but even leading up to that night, it's like a foggy but just terrible movie. Like Travis was he just got addicted really bad, like to the point where he would like be nodding off, when we were sitting there with like in the living room with my parents and all the kids are there, and he's just nodding off. And so my parents like kept pressuring him like, hey, you gotta like get off this stuff, like what's going on, blah blah blah. And just like any parents of addicts or family of addicts, like sometimes you just don't understand the situation. Like it's not as easy as like, hey, you just gotta get off this stuff, like. But that's what it was. That was very much the tone. Like, hey, you got to let this stuff go. And he wanted to. His fiance was pregnant with his first child. And anyway, I remember it got to the point where my parents were like, listen, why don't you just come here? You can stay here and go through the worst of the withdrawal. And we'll just do it together. Like, we'll just get you through this. And so he agreed, and he came over, and they literally locked him in my parents' room for like 7 days straight. And he was in there, and us kids didn't go in the whole time. So I can only imagine what he was going through. But he didn't, like, he was in that room for a week. And he was addicted to heroin and fentanyl at the time. And he came out after like a week. And I remember, like, it was the first time I seen him. Like, oh, he's alive, like, And he was like, everybody's like, how do you feel? He's like, oh, I feel pretty good. And he's like, I'm gonna get some fresh air. I'm gonna go for a walk. And I was like, okay. And so he went for a walk, and I remember he went for the walk, and he came back high. And when he came back high, my parents just lost it. Like, they were just like, you don't want it. Like, you're about to have a baby, get out of here, just leave. Or he may have already even had Cheyenne, but, just leave. Don't come back until you're sober. Like, was the last thing. And he left, and I don't remember exactly how many days it was, but like in a matter of days, like we got this phone call at night. And I just remember my dad is so chill. He's so quiet and just mellow and even keeled. And I remember hearing my dad's voice like quiver a little bit. He was like, wait, what? That's all he said. And I just knew, like, and my mom started screaming. I swear, it was like a movie. My mom started screaming, my dad, what? And I was standing at the base of the stairs that go to the second floor of our house, and I didn't feel anything at the moment. I just sat down on the stair, just kind of taking it all in, and yeah, I was numb. So that night, my parents invited like a couple of our best friends over just to like keep us company. But I went to bed, and I woke up the next morning like nothing happened, and I went to school. And I still didn't cry. I still hadn't like really felt it. And so I got to my first class, and it was science. I remember it was biology, I want to say. And this teacher, she loved me. I loved her. I was a good student, you know. So I'm in her class, Miss Soriano, something like that. And I was just sitting there with my head down. And she's like, Mark, pick your head up, you know. And then she'd just go back to teaching. And then I would pick it up for a second, and then I'd put it back down. And she's like, Mark, pick your head up, you know. And then finally she came over, and she's like, Mark, what's going on? Like, I told you to pick your head up. Are you like, what's going on? And I looked up at her, and I was like, my big brother died last night. And like, I just lost it. And so she was like, you got to get out of here. What are you doing in class? What are you doing? And so she sent me to the counselor's office, and that was just like a really bad turn of events for me, because, you know, I thought things were getting normal, and I thought I was like becoming a normal kid, but like that just threw me right back into like not normal. And I think I was already dabbling in like smoking weed and stuff at this time. I was 16. And so I was just, as you can imagine, I was going through it. And basketball was still like really the only thing that I had, because I still didn't have a good relationship with my parents. And it was getting worse because I was smoking weed. And then they're like, your brother just died from drugs and you're still doing drugs. What is wrong with you? Blah, blah, blah. And I just wasn't trying to hear it. And so hanging out with older kids that are throwing parties and drinking, and, you know, I never drank, but I was smoking weed at the parties. And man, the weed smoking got really bad after Travis died. I just was self-medicating constantly. And then I can't remember which one happened first, but I'm pretty sure this basketball story happened first. So the following basketball season, I'm playing ball. I'm the best player on my team. I'm a sophomore, being recruited already by several colleges. Very strong likelihood that I'm going to play basketball in college. But I was just really emotionally just going through it. And me and my coach, I had a great relationship, but I remember we were playing our rival team, and big game, and we were like relevant. Like the year before, our girls won the state championship. Like we were a good basketball school. So us playing our rival was a big deal. Should win the game, blah, blah, blah. So the game starts, tip off. The other team's point guard catches the tip. He comes down, dribbles, pulls up a three-pointer right in my face. Money. Okay, so not a big deal. People make good shots. It was good defense, but it was a good shot. So then I go down. We have a possession. You know, we miss. We come down. The point guard comes down, pulls up another three right in my face, makes it right out of the gate. So my coach, timeout, pulls me out and sits me down. So first of all, and I was pissed because I'm like, hey, dude, I play good D. Why are you taking me out? Like, you just made good shots. And my coach was the kind of coach, he was like, defense wins games, like really traditional fundamental basketball, and you do not talk back to him. And I was just like a hot shot, best player on the team, whatever. So I kind of gave him some lip on the way by, but so he sits me down. The rest of the quarter goes by, doesn't put me in. It's going to start the second quarter, still doesn't put me in. The rest of that quarter goes by. He doesn't put me in. We go into halftime, and he hasn't played me at all. He's benched me for the whole first half. And so me being, one, just in a really bad emotional spot, two, very arrogant, I went into the locker room at halftime. I took my shoes off. I put my sweatpants and my warm-up stuff back on. And I was like, fine, if you don't want to play me, I'm not going to play. And I refused to play the rest of the game, and I quit. The next morning, I came into school. I quit at halftime. Next morning, I come into school, brought my uniform, was like, cool. Like, if you don't want to play me, then I won't play. Like, that was, like, my mentality. And
you're still a little bit like that.
Oh, I'm still a little bit like that, yeah. And so, and so that was a really bad decision. It was really bad because what happened was a few weeks later, the athletic director called me into her office and was like, hey, we need to talk about what happened. Just need you to know, like, that's not the kind of behavior that's acceptable here. And so you are not allowed, like, you'll never play basketball here at this school again. And so my basketball career ended that day. Like, I didn't touch a basketball for, like, years after that. And with that, I really kind of was just like, screw it. Like, I got nothing left to live for. My brother just died. I'm not going to college anymore. And so I started dabbling in other drugs. I was, like, taking Xanax. I got sent home from school one day because they were saying that, like, I was taught. You ever seen Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas?
No.
Anybody, you ever never seen? Oh, there's a scene where the main character, I forget his name, but the main character is, like, on the phone, and he thinks that he's speaking intelligibly to the other person, but he's really like, swear.
Oh my gosh.
And he's like, why don't you know? And I got sent home from school because that was me in school. They were like, Mark, nobody could understand what you were saying.
Xanax is crazy. I don't know how people who are prescribed Xanax take Xanax.
I don't either.
That is crazy to me.
But they also take minor doses. I took a lot that day. That was my first time ever taking Xanax. Got sent home from school for being under the influence. Then I started, so this is getting bad now. I don't care about life or myself at all at this point. I was highly depressed, very lonely, felt isolated. The only person that I had accepted into my family just left me. Now this abandonment issue was doubly as bad as it was because I let him in and then he left.
And then he fulfilled the prophecy
in
your head.
And then one day I come home from school and I just reek like weed. I'm smoking weed. And every time I would come home smelling like weed, I would always be like, no, it was my friends. I was just around people who were smoking and it wasn't me. Then my parents would drug test me and I would pass the drug test because I was just crafty like that. So then I would pass it and I'd be like, see, I told you, double down on my lying. Wow. And one day I came home smelling like weed and my mom just kind of lost her cool on me and was just like, this is one of those days. Your brother died and da-da-da. And I'm like, listen, dude, like, I don't want to hear it. Like, I was just so depressed. And she said something to the effect, as long as you live under our roof, you're going to follow our rules. And if you don't like it, you can go somewhere else. And I heard that, and I was like, that's all I needed to hear. And I went upstairs. I packed a bag. And I had my own car at the time. I paid for my own car. I paid for my own car insurance. So I went upstairs and I just packed a bag and I just left. And I really, like, very infrequent. I basically didn't speak to my parents for, like, years after that. There was, like, little moments here and there. But at 16 years old, I literally was living on my own, trying to graduate high school, had an apartment. I had to try to pay rent. And so this is when I started selling weed. I started selling weed. That's how I was making money. I have a friend to this day, my boy AJ. I love this guy. But his stepdad gave me a job that was actually a really good job. And I didn't even know how good of a job it was because I was a little bull crap kid. But he gave me this really good job, and I quit it because I just felt like I could make more money selling weed. And so anyway, I was selling weed to my friends.
Have you ever apologized to him?
Yes. I've at least talked to him about it. I don't remember, but I know that I circled back. And he's a great dude, John. I still know him to this day. But
yeah.
So I'm selling weed at this point, and I'm missing so much school that the school is like, hey, listen, if you miss many more days, like, you're not going to be able to graduate. And I told them the situation. Hey, listen, I don't live at home. Now I have an apartment. I have bills. I have to try to pay rent. I can't just come to school and spend 8 hours a day here. Like, I need to work. And
selling weed takes so much effort.
No, I had a couple other, like, I was washing dishes and stuff. But, so they were like, pretty much, okay, just show up.
Which is crazy. Like, you're a child.
I know. Well, they let me double up on my classes. They
enabled you.
My junior year, they let me
send you home.
Well, they let me double up on my classes my junior year, and then I pretty much would only have to show up on test days. And I still am a really good test taker. Like, I've never failed a test in my life. So I would never.
Wouldn't be me.
Yeah. So I showed up on test days, and I would pass all the tests, and basically I graduated almost a year early, or half a year early. And then once I graduated, I was just like going deeper and deeper into like this druggy lifestyle. I had gotten into like EDM music, which I still really love, but I was like driving all around following these live shows. I would go to raves in New York City. I would drive to New York City from Albany, which is like a 3.5 hour drive each way. I would drive there like 2-3 times a week, just because all the shows were in New York City. So I would go down and bring my drugs and sell drugs at the club or at the show. And
you have to tell the story about the Chinatown bus.
Oh my gosh. All right. So there was this one, it's crazy, man. I can't overstate the way that I was living in this period of time. Like, I dove headfirst into like the world of psychedelics, and I don't know what it is about psychedelics that was so appealing to me. Maybe it was just literally being able to escape, and like in a real way. Like, it wasn't like, I don't know. I haven't done, the only drugs that I've done are psychedelics, but like, it wasn't like, well, I guess Xanax, but it wasn't like,
but you didn't go down like the crack.
Yeah, it wasn't like you're just like in a sped up version of what you're currently in, or a slowed down version of your normal reality. You're in a different reality. Mm-hmm. Like, it was very appealing.
Is that why they call speed?
I don't know. Oh. I have no idea. I don't know. I've never done it.
Okay.
But I did. I dove headfirst into this lifestyle, and I would just, I was the life of the party. Like, I would my whole life was just going to parties and, bringing the drugs, and everybody
Skrillex.
And everybody knew I was the guy, it's crazy, man. It really, because looking back, I learned a lot about business in that period of time. I learned a lot about sales. I learned a lot. I mean, I did.
College of the streets.
Yeah, I would, and so the night that you're talking about, it was the only night I ever ended up in the hospital, which is crazy to me.
Isn't it the only night you ever drank?
Yeah, I didn't. It was one of the first times I really drank when I went out, because I was so into what I was doing. When I would go out, I would like take acid, or I would take ecstasy, or variations of either one of those drugs, and so I was never really interested in getting drunk. Like, why would I drink? So this night we go, and I forget, it was Dylan Francis at
Fire DJ, by the way.
Yeah, Dylan Francis, and this is 2011. So this is
prime.
This is like when he was
good.
When he was like a guy, and we were at this like kind of like an underground rave spot in New York City, and I remember we get in there and the place is packed. Like, it's packed. You can't move. And when I'm like high and I hear music, I just want to dance. Like, I just want to, I need my space. I want to be able to, for real. I don't want to be able to.
But you're dancing. It's so funny because, it's literally if you, like you're like arms are out and it's like you're flying a plane. Like they're like
I just get lost. I just feel the
like,
music.
Like,
I do.
3 times to the left, bounce 3 times to the right.
That's what I do. I don't know, but so I need space for that. And so the only option is we see the VIP sections up there. And so I'm like, cool, let's
You're like,
let's go VIP. Yeah, exactly. I have the cash. So let's go VIP. So we buy a VIP. Mind you, I'm not even 21. Not even 21. They sell me a VIP table. In order to get the VIP section, you have to buy 2 bottles. And then with your 2 bottles, a complimentary bottle of champagne comes. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, let's go. 19. Let's do it. So I buy it, and we go up there, and all I want is some water. Like, I'd already taken my drugs. I'm just thirsty. I'm so thirsty. And I'm like, I just want some water. They're bringing me the bottles. Here, sir. Here, sir. I'm like, dude, I just want some water. Where's the water? You put the bottles down. Give me some water. And they're like, okay, we'll be right back. But the place is packed. And they're taking forever. And so my girlfriend at the time, that's who I was with, and I think I was just with her. She's like, all right, I'll go get water. You just chill. Because she knew I was like, I was going down a hole. And so she leaves, goes to water. But all I know is that I didn't wait for her to get back. I took the champagne, and I was just so thirsty that I just started drinking it like water. And that was certainly the first time I ever drank champagne. Maybe that's why I don't drink champagne to this day. But
yeah, I have the first time I ever drank like that alcohol. I won't.
Okay, so I drink it. Now, if you know anything about like ecstasy or MDMA, like you can't mix it with alcohol. It's bad. And I always knew that. That's part of the reason why I didn't drink. But I did that night. And next thing I know, I wake up in the hospital the next morning, completely blacked out, don't remember nothing. Wake up in the hospital. And when I wake up, imagine, you just open your eyes, you're in the hospital. Don't know how you got there. You're in the hospital. Your machines are attached to you or whatever. And I look over, and there's a doctor standing right there. And all I said was like, oh boy. And they both started laughing, the doctor and the doctor goes, sir, how much did you drink last night? And I was just like, I don't know. It's a long story short. I was just really dehydrated, and it wasn't anything serious, but I kind of like was acting like it was serious. So I was really dehydrated. They sent me to the hospital. So I checked out, and I'm like walking out. I remember as I was walking out, there was like I'm like walking, and there's a garbage can right there. And in stride, I just like, and threw up in the garbage can, just kept walking. All right, I feel better. Man. And I just kept walking, and I realized, I go through the little check. I realized my wallet's gone. All my cash is gone. My drugs are gone. Everything's gone. We were in the habit of taking what's called the China bus to and from New York City. There's like in Chinatown, they have these bus routes that go back and forth to all the other major cities in the area. And these Chinese people will have these like, it's totally illegal, but they'll have these like double-decker buses, and they'll just pack as many people on there like sardines as they can. Yeah, and you pay like literally $20, and they'll take you somewhere that the ticket should be $100. Like it's stupid. And so I would do that, and I would smuggle drugs that way too, right? And so I got no ID, no money, no nothing. I'm like, let's go to Chinatown. I bet you that we're trying to get back home. We're 3.5 hours away from home. So we go to Chinatown, and I just go to these Chinese people, and I'm like, listen, I promise I'll pay you when I get there. I don't have no cash. And they're like, okay, you pay. Yeah. And they let me on. And so thankfully, we got blessed that day, but we made it home. But yeah, that was just like, that was the kind of life that I was living at the time. And I go back, and okay, so from the time that I graduated high school to like this time, I'd already lost 2 other of my very close friends to drug overdoses. Mm-hmm. My friend Jared Valeni, I lost my friend Kyle Koch. And then also I lost a third friend to drinking and driving. So like, I mean, my brother died, and then it was just like boom, boom, boom. Like kids were dropping like flies left and right. And I was like with them.
Which like, I kind of have found this out since knowing you, but I didn't realize that Albany area was such a, like there's just such a high occurrence of like drug addiction there.
I mean, I think it's everywhere. I mean, but we were actually outside of Albany. We weren't in Albany. We were outside of Albany, and it was in like a rural area. And sometimes the rural areas can be even worse.
Yeah.
Because those kids don't have anything to do. They're just bored, and they sit around party. And if, God forbid, one kid gets addicted to drugs, it spreads like wildfire. And that's what was happening where we lived. And so, you know, I was seeing all this, super depressed, using drugs literally every night. Literally every day I was using drugs. I was getting tattoos for no reason. I would just get high and then go get stupid shit tattooed. That's why I have so many tattoos now. I have like dumb stuff. I mean, I have a Grateful Dead bear on my arm.
Which actually is like one of the first things, like when Mark and I started dating and we worked in a fitness facility. So like he was working out wearing a tank top, and I was like, oh, like you like the Grateful Dead? And he was like, totally caught him off guard. He was like, how do you know what that is?
Yeah.
You're not old enough to know what that is.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, yeah, so this is the life I was living. And I'm going to, like, you know, you guys get the picture there, right? And
basically, you're on a path
of
self-destruction.
Like
destruction.
Yeah.
Suicidal almost, but, like, not in a sense.
I was progressing to that point. And then I can't remember if we were 18 or 19 when Matt caught his case, but there was like this.
So wait, I feel like, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I feel like it's important to like talk about it. Was Matt on this same path?
No.
With you? Because like when you left the house.
When I left the house, I left on my own. Matt stayed. And then he left shortly after. But remember what I said earlier, we had two completely different friend groups.
Yeah.
We had two completely different personalities, two completely different lifestyles. So Matt went and moved in with these other kids, and he was sleeping on his friend's couch. I had an apartment in a different town. And we were on separate paths. I was like going to these music festivals, listening to EDM, and Matt was like in the hood, like, you know.
It was very different.
It was
parallel paths of destruction, but different.
Yes. Matt had gotten really addicted to cocaine and alcohol. Like,
and
that's what our parents were addicted to.
Were you talking at that point?
No, I mean, we didn't talk much. We interacted a little bit, and we would meet up at parties and stuff like that, but then we would go our separate ways because his friend group was people that I didn't have any interest in being around, and vice versa. And so, you know, at this point I was selling like a good amount of drugs, selling a good amount of weed, making a good amount of money, and I was busy. I was running back and forth from Florida to New York. I was like all over the East Coast, like doing my thing, and I was networking with people. One time I met this guy at a music festival in upstate New York that had this purple sour diesel that was like the nicest sour diesel I'd ever seen in my life. And like, you know, back then, this is not when good weed was everywhere. Like, you know, good weed was like expensive and hard to find. And so this kid told me that he was from Florida, and we were selling a large amount of weed at the time. And so he told me he was from Florida, and I'm like, dude, I need some of this purple sour. Can you get more of this? And he's like, yeah. So me and my friend Mikey literally drove from upstate New York to Florida just to go down and check this weed out. Like, I mean, this is like how I was living. So I was busy. And I remember being in Florida at one time, which that's when I got my So Good But No Good tattoo.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. I have a tattoo on my shin that says So Good But No Good. So I get to Florida, and this guy...
Not finished either.
And this guy... It's not finished because that shit hurts. But this guy... It's my favorite tattoo, though. So this guy, this hippie dude, he didn't say it was like a test, but it was a test. Like, as soon as we showed up, he's like, oh, dude, you ever done Deems? And I'm like, no.
What is that?
DMT.
Oh. Listen, you gotta dumb it down for the goody two shoes.
And I'm like, no. And he's like, oh, dude, you gotta try it. You gotta try it. And I'm like, I can't say no. I want the weed. So I Yeah, that was the first time I did DMT. And then, but anyway, I had this connection to this guy. He had a tattoo on his shin that said "so good but no good," and I'm like, "That's sick, dude." And so, anyway, I got the tattoo, and then found out that the weed was trash. He didn't have the same weed. It was terrible. So anyway, I'm going back and forth from New York to Florida, and I'm like really just kind of out in la la land. And then I got a call when I was in Florida at one time from my friend Morgan, who was one of my best friends growing up. And now, apparently now she worked at a hospital in the ICU, or in the intensive care unit. So at this time, people were telling me, like, my friends were like saying to me, "Hey bro, your brother's like, you gotta talk to your brother. You gotta talk to your brother. He's out of control." And I heard this from several people. And so I came back up to New York from Florida, and I was looking for my brother. And I'm like, "Hey, anybody see my brother?" And I found out where he was hanging out. I find him one day. He's like walking down the street with a box of wine, like at like 11 a.m., you know? And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I got this girlfriend and blah, blah, blah." And, you know, and he's full-blown addicted to cocaine and alcohol. Like, I mean, 18 years old, literally smoking crack, like freebasing cocaine, like just bad. And to me, that was just such a foreign idea. Like, where did this come from, you know? And even though I was doing my drugs, like, I just saw him. Like, to me, he looked like he wasn't. We were in the same worst spot. But he looked like he was in such a worse spot. And so I had, basically a safe house in the town that he lived in. And so I was like, "Hey, this is where I'm staying while I'm up here. Like, you can come stay with me, whatever." And so we go to my apartment, and I was like, "Hey, like, here's the deal. I don't want you to you can smoke all the weed you want." We had a ton of weed there. "You can smoke all the weed you want, but don't bring any cocaine in this house. Like, you know, like, I don't want any of that stuff around me." And he was like, "Okay, bro, okay, whatever." And we go to sleep that night, and I wake up at like 2-3 in the morning, like, to my door closing. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, I was scared. And so I come out, and it's just Matt. He's coming home. And I'm like, "Yo, where are you coming from right now?" And he's like, "Hi," you know, and he had been out breaking into cars and stealing the change to go buy coke. And like, he wouldn't like break into them. Like, he would just check the door handles, and any doors that were unlocked, he would go in and just take the change. And he explained that to me. And I'm like, "Bro, like, this is when we had like the conversation." And I'm like, "Bro, like, what's going on? Like, what, like, where does this even come from? Like, we don't know anybody that ever did coke. Like, this was never, when did this become the thing that people do?" Like, and I remember him saying to me, like, he's like, "Bro, when I'm on it, I just don't feel anything." That's what he said to me. And it like broke my heart. He's like, "I just don't feel anything." And I knew what he meant, because I was trying to escape those feelings too. And I was like, "Listen, dude, we can, you know, we gotta do something else. You can't do this. Like, there's plenty of other things." So I was like, "You should come back to Florida with me, because, like, dude, there's different friends down there. Get you away from these people, get you into the sunlight, you know, like, we can change things, right?" And he's like, all right. And he agrees. And so we agree that it was like a Wednesday. And we agreed that I was going to buy us both plane tickets back to Florida, and we were going to go down there, and we were just going to start fresh. He was going to live with me down there. And I bought plane tickets for Saturday. So he's like, "All right, I'll meet you at the airport, whatever." A couple days go by, I don't hear from him. And then on Saturday, I'm like waiting, trying to find him. Like, "Yo, has anybody seen my brother? I'm trying to find him because I want to go pick him up and go to the airport." And then all of a sudden, at the last minute, I get a text. And he's like, "Bro, I have something I got to take care of. You should just go and then move my flight to next Saturday, and I'll meet you down there." And I just was kind of at my wit's end. So I'm like, all right, whatever. And I get on the plane and I leave because he wasn't going to come. And I go down to Florida, and then I got the phone call. I was like telling my mom that day, I was like, "Man, I just feel like something's off." Like, I started calling people in New York, like, "Hey, does anybody," I felt it. like, has anybody seen my brother? Like, does anybody know where's my brother? I'm calling everybody. And then Morgan called me, and she's like, hey, I work in the hospital. Your brother's in critical condition. Essentially what happened was my brother postponed the flight because he was going to rob his drug dealer and get some money to come start fresh with in his new life. This is a terrible idea. And him and some friends went into this house, and they thought that the guy that they were trying to rob was the only person there. And he wasn't. They had the guy in there at gunpoint, apparently, and the guy's son was there, and he comes in behind Matt with a steak knife, and he starts stabbing him in the back. Matt got stabbed 9 times, 3 times in his lower back, 3 times in the back of his neck, and then 3 times in the back of his head. And the only reason the kid stopped stabbing him was because the blade literally snapped off the handle and was lodged in Matt's skull. And his friends, of course, left him for dead right there. They left him for dead. And so police came. They had to rush Matt off to the hospital, and he woke up in the hospital with a handcuff to the bed. That's when I got the call. And so I come up from Florida, and, there's nothing I could do. I couldn't even go to see him in the county. Man, I can't even explain, like, how lonely I felt. Like, I'm like, I lost my mom, I lost my brother, and now, like, Matt, now Matt's gone, the only person I've had. And that's when, like, the suicidal, like, disposition, like, really crept in. Like, I was just like, screw it. Like, why am I even here? All my friends were dying. At least that's how it felt. Jared and Kyle and, and so, I just, at that point, my whole life was just doing drugs as recklessly as I could because I really just wanted to commit suicide. I just didn't have the courage to. And then, long story short, I got arrested. I got arrested when I was 18 years old, or 19. Maybe I just turned 19, with an assortment of psychedelic drugs. And I actually got arrested twice. I always talk about the psychedelic drugs, but there was actually another one. So I actually got arrested. Let's see. I can't remember which one was first. Yeah. So the first arrest was just money and a handgun. I got, somebody set me up. Like, I used to mail weed from California to New York, and then all the good weed came from out west back then. So we would mail it from Oregon or California or whatever, and we'd bring it, and then we'd have good weed. And so this guy that we were sending weed to his house, basically, when the weed showed up, cops showed up, they pressed him. He was like, hey, it's not my weed, it's Mark's weed. So he called me and was like, hey, dude, you have to come get your weed, blah, blah, blah. And I pull onto the block, and it was just a setup. So I get out of my car, and I'm walking down the street, and then I just, like, this whole, like, task force. People start jumping out of minivans and punch buggies and all this stuff. They arrest me. Well, they detain me, and they search me, and they take my keys out of my pocket, and then they start clicking, and they see what car was my car. And then they found my car. They unlocked it. They searched the car, and I had, like, a bunch of money and a firearm in the car. And since, like, the weed wasn't directly tied to me, the money wasn't outrageous, and the firearm charge was like a relatively small-time charge at the time in New York, and it was nonviolent, like, wasn't on my person type thing. So it wasn't that serious. It was serious for sure, but it wasn't that serious. So I bailed out, and on bail, I got rearrested with a large assortment of drugs and money. And
but that story with the second arrest, you weren't driving.
Yeah, so that was just really, that was really messy, and, it's okay. That's not even an important detail of the story. It's something that I talk about sometimes to make a point, but, it was stupid. And so anyway, I get arrested, and it's a good thing that I got arrested, but that wasn't even it. I ended up bailing out again. I remember the cop being like, I don't know, he was like talking shit to me. and I was like talking shit back, and he's like, and we were on our way to the arraignment, and I was like, man, I'm gonna be out of here in 2 hours. And he's like, you ain't never gonna be able to make bond or bail. And I just took that as a personal challenge, so of course I did. And I bail out, and I told him, I remember telling him, I'm gonna bail out, and I'm gonna go to Florida, and you guys are gonna have to come get me, because I ain't coming back to court. And it's a funny story that I like reflect on now, because that's what I did. I bailed out, I went on the run, I disappeared, and I was down in Florida where my mom lived. And I didn't come back to court until the federal marshals had to come and get me. It was crazy. But they did. And the funniest part is that when I finally got brought back to court, it was the same guy that was working the court that day. And he was like, listen, if the judge asks me, I'm going to vouch for your honesty. Because you told me that you were going down to Florida, and that's exactly where you went.
That's crazy.
I swear. So yeah, anyway, I go to prison, and I got sentenced to 4 years in prison, and it was mainly for the drugs. Mm-hmm. So I get sentenced to 4 years in prison for drug. I had a Class A drug possession, which is a big deal, like a Class A felony, like a murder is a Class A felony, you know, just because of the type of substances I had. And so I got charged with that. It got reduced. I got sentenced to 4 years in prison, but then I ended up doing 5.5. So when you were saying in the beginning, like I talk about prison a lot, and I was saying, yeah, it's because a lot of my life changed in prison. Sometimes people hear me talk about my story and they assume that I went to prison and I just got better, like prison helped me somehow. Mm-hmm. But actually I went to prison and I got worse initially. I went in and I still had this, like, I didn't value my life. I took it all for granted. I still had no relationship with my parents. Like, I was just alone in the world, and I was still suicidal. I was still depressed. And so I went to prison, and I started, I figured out the game really quickly, and I started selling drugs in prison. I started selling, controlling, like, gambling and all kinds of illegal activity inside of prison. And I ended up getting rearrested in prison for the same thing that I went to prison for, which was a drug possession. And they, I remember the day that I got rearrested. It was crazy. Like, when you get in trouble in prison, you go to the box, is what they call it, solitary confinement. I spent nearly half of all the time I spent in prison in the box. Like, it's crazy. I spent like over 2 years cumulatively in solitary confinement. And I was in the box and I was just like pacing, I'm like pacing. I don't know what for. But all of a sudden I heard the CO come on, like, the, in the walkway, and he's like, Joe, get ready. You're taking a trip. And I'm like, I'm taking a trip. Like, where am I going? Like, you don't take, when you're in the box, you just stay in the box the whole time. They don't take you anywhere. And I'm like, where am I going? And he's like, oh, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. That's all he said. And when he said that, I knew it was not okay. And I'm like, where are we going? Where are we going? He's like, oh, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. So in the solitary confinement, before they open your cell, you have to, like, turn around, put your back to the door, put your hands out the slot. They put cuffs on your hands, and then you pull them back in. Then they open the door. Then you step back, and you step to the side, and you put your head on the wall, and then they put chains on your feet, and the whole time, I remember when they put the chains on my feet, you could hear it because I was shaking. And I'm like, where are we going? Where are we going? It's going to be fine. They take me to the local state police barracks. And they fingerprint me, book me for new charges. And the whole time I'm just beside myself. I'm like, there's no way I just caught another felony. And they brought me back that day, and I was in my cell, and I remember, like, thinking, I was like, what am I going to tell my parents? Like, what am I going to tell my parents? I'm like, at this point, I'm like a year and a half from coming home. And I just caught another charge that's going to give me another year and a half. And I'm like thinking about telling them like a story, like a lie. Like I was just going to be like, the guard set me up, or it wasn't my drugs, or, you know, like I'm innocent. Like I just was going to lie. And I had this crystal clear thought. I don't know. Some would just say that it's just God spoke to me. And, you know, it was like, no, Mark, you're not a kid anymore. Like, you're not a kid anymore. Like, when you lie, like, what are you lying for? Like, as an adult, you have free will. You can make whatever decision you want. Like, nobody has to understand or accept it, but you're making the decision. And so why are you lying? Like, you don't make mistakes. You make decisions. And all of your decisions have foreseeable potential consequences. So, like, if you're, and like, from that moment forward, I had the mindset that, like, if I was going to make a decision, I was just going to own it. Like, you didn't have to be okay with it. I'm a grown man. Like, I can make whatever decision I want. So that was the moment that I switched from the mindset of a child that felt like I had to lie and that I had to live for you or your expectations or appease you in any way, to an independent adult that was making my own decisions, and I was just going to live with whatever consequences. And sometimes it's important to note, like, I never, ever, ever, I never decided, never along my whole journey, I never decided that I was going to change my life. I only decided that I was going to stop lying. Like, I was like, in that moment, I was like, you're not a kid anymore. Like, you don't have any reason to lie to anybody because you don't have to explain yourself. You get to live your own life. And that was it. It changed everything. It changed everything. So I didn't like change my mindset right away, but from that moment forward, when I would want to go do so, I would be tempted to go do something that I was used to doing. You know, placing a bet or taking a bet, or, you know, selling some drugs or buying some drugs or whatever. I would think to myself, well, if this goes bad, am I going to want to own it? Am I going to want to tell my parents that I did this? And it would deter me from doing it because I was so committed to not lying anymore and just taking ownership of anything that I did, whether it went the way I wanted it to or whether it went south. And so it would deter me. And one thing at a time, I just was reluctant to do the things that I was always doing because I didn't want to have to tell them again that I got arrested again. Mm-hmm. And I remember one night I was coming home from, at this time I started to get involved in like some programs, like some AA, NA, you know, some stuff. And I was coming home from one of those programs, and I was talking to a guy that night who was on his 6th bid. He was in prison for the 6th time for the same charges that I had. And every single time, all 6 times, he came to jail for the same thing, drug possession. And I remember walking back to my housing unit that night thinking, like, that's going to be me. Like, I'm going to be like that guy. And this sounds really bad, but the only thing that I thought was like, well, I know that, like, I can always go back to selling drugs. Like, I'm pretty smart. Like, why don't I just try, like, selling something else, like doing something else? And that was like the first acknowledgement, conscious acknowledgement that, like, my life was changing its direction. And at this time too, I was getting sober. Like, this was the beginning of my sobriety journey. And yeah, so everything changed. Everything changed. Changing my life in prison was easily the hardest thing I've ever had to do, because social pressure and the you know, social pressure can be so strong. We see it in our society today, like groupthink and, like, you know, all these like psychological phenomena. They're real. Like, everybody's standing here. If you have 100 people in this room, you know, yelling in my face, she's a boy, right? Like, I know that you're a woman, but if people say it enough, there's science that backs this. This is provable. This is replicable. There's mountains of research to support this. You say it enough, eventually the person is like, they succumb to the peer pressure, to the social pressure. And they say, okay, well, you know what? She might be a boy. She says she's a boy, so she's a boy. No. So that's just one example. But social pressure is that strong. It will get you to abandon yourself. And so you got to think, like I had to think about the level of conviction. And I say this not with pride, but looking back, think about the level of conviction that I had to have to be in an environment where, one, everybody already had an expectation of who I was. I was the guy that was controlling the drugs. I was the guy that was, good for gambling. I was the guy that was tough, that would fight anybody at any time. And I was this gangster dude. And then all of a sudden, I was like a good guy. And I was going to programs, and I was, wearing my pants up around my waist, and, and I was tucking my shirt in, and I was doing my So
I think there's something to be said, though, about how much time you spent alone. Like, I don't think that anyone in our current culture spends as much time alone as you spent alone consecutively in those.
Yeah, I the first time I realized how much we conveniently distract ourselves in society. I mean, like, every waking moment of the day, most people's attention is on something that is outside of themselves. Like, think about it. When you wake up, the first thing you do is probably grab your phone and look and see if you had any text messages or missed calls while you were sleeping. And then just from that moment forward, like, you're just attention is laid on things. It's not on nothing. And it's definitely not internal. The first time I realized it was when I went to the box. The small box is like this period of time when you get in trouble. You have like an arraignment, and you go to a little thing, and they decide how long you need to spend in the box. But that period of time where you're waiting, you're in something called the small box. And in the small box, in the facility that I was in, there was no talking allowed. You couldn't talk. And if you talked and the guards heard you talking, they would just walk past your cell the next time they were serving a meal. And they would literally skip you on mealtime. And when you're in the box, the only thing you have to look forward to is the next meal. That's the only thing. And I remember watching these guys, not watching, but listening. There would be people, they were so uncomfortable sitting alone in a cell by themselves with nothing to distract them, that they would talk to the guy next to them, be like, yo, cell, let's say I'm in cell 18, and yo, 19, who's over there? And they would talk and get in trouble and literally sacrifice their meal because they wouldn't sit there by themselves. And I remember thinking to myself, because I knew how uncomfortable I was being alone with my thoughts, with nothing to distract me for the first time in my life in that cell. And I knew how unbearable. It was unbearable. So when I would watch that, I knew exactly why they were doing that. And it was because it was so uncomfortable to be in there. And that's when I started thinking about it, and I realized I have never been in a situation in my entire life where I have nothing to distract me. I have nothing to lay my attention on, and I did a lot of thinking in that time.
I think I feel like too, though, that was like your therapy in a sense.
Yeah.
Because
it did become very therapeutic for me.
Yeah.
But it also, like, there's these advocates that say that it's inhumane. It is 100%.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that it's like.
But it's necessary.
Correct.
I don't know any other way to do it.
I think more so, like, I'm not saying to starve people and to lock them in a box with no possessions and no concept of time. And, that's not what I'm saying. But I think that in our society, people are averse still to, like, being alone
100%
with their thoughts, even in the sense of, like, journaling. Like, like I say it from my own experience, it's hard to get myself to sit down and want to journal. Like, most of the times I don't want to journal because I'm like, I have a million other things that I could and need to do right now than sit here and be like, okay, today Mark and I went on a date and played tennis and this, and this. And it's like, but I enjoy it every time I do it. It's like this weird like trick that your brain plays on you that it's like, nah, I don't want to do that. But like every time I do it, I feel so much better. And I feel like, albeit the methodology wasn't great, that you were alone, like you were able to like write a letter to Travis and forgive him. You were able to like read so many different books and like learn and gain this knowledge of like all these new, you know, things that you were interested in that like allowed you and set you up well for life after prison.
Yeah, I have this thing now that I say silence and solitude. I think silence and solitude is the most therapeutic. It's a remedy that exists. Silence and solitude, because you just got to work through your stuff. You do.
Yeah.
You have to. It will eat you alive. That's what it was doing to me. It was eating me alive from the inside, and it was going to kill me if I didn't address it, if I didn't just acknowledge it. And so I did. I spent a lot of time in the box. I started journaling during this period. I started reading a lot during this period. Then when I got out of the box, it was hard. It was really hard because now I have all these gangster dudes calling me. You know, it's so crazy because in the middle school, elementary school, I experienced racism from white people. Well, now I started to experience racism from black people. They'd be like, oh, white boy, you know, oh, he's a good kid now, and blah, blah, blah. Like you know, it's so crazy being half black, half white, because at periods of my time, in periods of my life, I realized that, like, to white people, I was always going to be a black kid. And to black guys, I was always not black enough. Like, I was like white boy. So like it was really weird.
I can imagine that's a struggle that most people.
I don't think it's as prevalent these days, but back then it certainly was.
I mean, I just mean in the sense of like a lack of like identifying with a specific group of people. Like, and that's got to be tough. Like, because as a kid, all you want to do is like fit in, right? Yeah. Like that's how we're wired. We're meant to be communal people, and so like I imagine that's a tough struggle for mixed people.
Yeah. So I'm in general population is what they call it, and I was just reading so much literature. The way that I describe so from that turning point to the end, I literally lived like a monk. Like I read this book, the Bhagavad Gita, which there's so much wisdom in this book, but it's a Hindu spiritual text, and they're really big on like renunciation and abnegation, like just denying oneself things. And I just got big into that. Like I embraced it a little bit, and I wanted to test my discipline. I started working on cultivating discipline because I was sober, and I wanted to stay sober. And then also once I got sober, I sort of substituted in food for drugs, and I just became like, I would binge eat. I had binge eating disorder, like no joke. Like I would binge eat, and then I would make myself throw up, and then I would binge eat. And so I had a full-blown eating disorder, and I just had to get a grip on it. And so during this time, I started, like I said, journaling, reading, writing. That's all I did. I stopped watching TV. I stopped gambling. I stopped eating junk food. I stopped listening to music. And I was just really trying to like recreate myself. And it worked. It worked. During that time was when I like really developed a spiritual relationship too. And truthfully, like looking back, I can't take credit for the transformation that happened in me. Like it was crazy. I mean, it was so drastic. And just the resistance that I faced when I tried to change, when I changed my friend group, when I changed the way I showed up, when I changed the way, it was so heavy. And there was moments where like I had to literally risk my life to like stay the course. And I did. And my life would be spared. And it wasn't just once. Like it's by the grace of God that I changed the way I did, like for real. And that's when I met God, was during that period. So I've told this story on before, but one of the first major changes that I made was I adopted a morning routine. And prison is like the noisiest place on earth, because these guys, you live among 60 guys. At least I was at 60 at this time. You live among 60 other guys, maybe more in some housing units. And they're just constantly talking. Like, they're just talking. You can never get a moment of quiet. Never. And there's always TVs on. There's just all kinds of things happening. Music's playing. And so I was reading this guy, James Allen, at the time, who's really big on waking up while everybody else is still asleep. And so I decided that I was going to start trying to wake up early. And I woke up early the first time, and it was silent. I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was silent. And I was like, holy crap, like, this is I hadn't heard silence in years. And so I decided that I was going to start waking up at 4 o'clock every morning. And so I would wake up at 4 o'clock, and what my routine developed into was really cool. But I would roll off my bed onto my hands and knees, and I would get on my hands and knees, and I would put my head on the ground, and I would go through this gratitude practice. And mind you, I wasn't religious. At the time. I didn't follow a specific religion. I was just going through this gratitude thing to bring me back to gratitude. And I would be like, thank you, God. And I had the same thing. I would just close my eyes and visualize all the things that I had to be grateful for. And one of the things I would be like, thank you, because I know that there's hundreds of millions of people in the world right now that would give anything to be where I am, in a prison in the United States of America, with 3 hot meals and a roof over my head and a shower that I'm about to go get. So I would go through this thing, and then I would get up, I would go shower, I would make my coffee, and I would come back to my cell, and that's when I started drinking black coffee.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Up until then, I'd always drank my coffee with heavy cream, heavy sugar. I would go to the Dunkin' Donuts and be like, I like my coffee like I like my women, extra light and extra sweet. And I thought it was the funniest joke ever. They did it.
I'm sure that the drive-thru people were like, okay, that'll be $6.35 at the window, please. Next.
And so at this point in time, though, I don't know what it was, but I just started drinking my coffee black. Yeah. So I would make a black cup of coffee, and I would sit there with my little lamp on, and in the pitch black, in the pure silence, and I would just sit there and drink my coffee black, one sip at a time, and it was bitter, and it was nasty, and I loved it.
Yeah.
And this is when I fell in love with black coffee, and with coffee,
in general,
because it was just like, now I have this attachment to it where, like, it's about more than coffee. It's about what I found in those mornings. Like, I found myself. Like, who I am today was created while drinking those cups of coffee, just ruminating on myself and my life and my past and my future. And
I feel like you short yourself when people ask you that question, because I've heard you answer it very differently, like, or a multitude of different ways.
I don't always want to, like, explain.
I know,
life,
but it's valuable. You know, it is valuable.
Like, I'm taking my time now because I'm never doing this again.
Yeah.
You know?
Save this.
But you know, so that was my routine, and then eventually there's something that I just recently talked with the men's group about. So I would wake up at 4. The lights didn't come on until 7. So I would have like 3 hours before everybody really started stirring, but really like 2.5. So I would do that. So eventually I started doing yoga. Like, at this time, I was like, there were some guys that, like, really, that I was just avoiding. Like, I'm not even gonna lie. Like, I was just avoiding them because I knew I didn't want to get into an issue. Like, at one point when I was incarcerated, right at the beginning of me wanting to change my life, I'm very principled. If you know me to this day, I will be so stubborn on principle. And in prison, the prisons are run by gangs. And in the prisons that I was in, they were run by the Bloods. And the head of the Bloods in any given compound is called the Big Homie. Well, I was in the same housing unit with the Big Homie. And just to make this story is not, I don't want to glamorize it, but he did something that was disrespectful to me, and so I waited for all the guys to go to the cafeteria for what they call chow, but dinner. And when everybody walked out, I beat his ass. And you just don't do that. You just don't do that to the big homie. And so they had like a hit out on me, right? So I was like avoiding. I wasn't going outside and exercising. I wasn't going anywhere. I would go to my program, come back, stay in my cube, my cell, and I just wouldn't talk to nobody. I wouldn't bother nobody. But I was certainly I was just purposely doing that. And so I started exercising. Yoga was something that I figured I could just do in my cell. Like I didn't need any room. I didn't need to go anywhere. And so I found this book that was like, and I taught myself how to do yoga out of this book. And I got really good at it. And so my routine ended up being like wake up, gratitude, journal, read, yoga. And then after I was done with yoga, I would go out into the common area. Mind you, every morning when I would wake up, the guard would be sleeping. Like would be knocked out. Like I could do anything I wanted. Like for real. It was crazy. So I'd go out into the common area, and for whatever reason, I started mopping. Like anybody that's ever done AA or NA, they know that like there's like something about service. Like they say in AA and NA, in order to keep it, you have to give it away. You know, that's just a really common saying. And what they mean is like in order to stay sober, you got to share sobriety with other people. But in religion and Christianity and in a lot of things, like service is powerful. Like to this day, when I'm mopping, I think this is worship. Like that's what I think. Back then, I developed that mindset. I would go out to the common area, and it wasn't my job, but I would fill the mop bucket and I would just mop the floor perfectly. And every morning I would take my time and make sure it was perfect. And I think what started it was during the winter, and in the winter in New York it snows and there's salt outside. So every day the floor would get disgusting because our boots would track salt in and salt and water, and then it would dry and look disgusting. So I would wake up and just mop the floor, make sure it was perfect. And then eventually I would get done with enough time that I would go into the laundry room. There's a shared laundry room, and I would find that everybody's laundry was just in there in their little sacks, like knapsack things, and it was all just crumpled up in the bottom of it with a knot. So I would unknot it, and I would go through one bag at a time, and I would fold everything.
Huh, I didn't know you knew how to do that.
Yeah, you do, because you know I'm very particular about how I fold things.
Just your T-shirt, which you so kindly taught me how to do.
But I would fold everything, and it was so funny because like these guys would. They would come in and be like, who the fuck is folding all the laundry? You know? And I wouldn't say nothing. You know?
Yeah.
No, I knew it was me.
The laundry fairy.
But I would do it. And while I would do it, I would just do gratitude. Like, and this is now looking back, I know this was how my relationship with God developed, was I had this constant dialogue where I was just like, and then I would want to serve. I would want to give. I would want to be selfless, and it would make me feel closer. Like I just had these urges to just do this stuff for no reason. And I have this thing that I talk about often is in life, you clean things and they get dirty again, but you keep cleaning anyway. And, this is a very powerful lesson I had to learn, was when I would mop the floor during the winter. I would mop the floor, and in the beginning I would get done with like just enough time, and then the lights would come on and everybody would come out, and then they would go to breakfast and they would come back. And as soon as they get back from breakfast, the floor would be filthy again. And I would be like mad. Like, dang, I'd put like a path with like a carpet, and I'm like, yeah, just walk on the path. Like, and nobody would do it. They would just
like,
walk.
Yeah, if you, buddy.
Yeah. And so they would just filthy, and I would get frustrated, and I had to assess it, right? And then one day I said to myself, Mark, it's fine. Like, I didn't clean it for it to stay clean.
Yeah.
I cleaned it just because cleaning it felt like something that the best version of me would do. They would see that it's dirty, and they would clean it anyway. And so I developed this phrase: in life, you clean things and they just get dirty again, but you keep cleaning them anyway. And it just reminds me that I don't ever do anything for the outcome. The only good reason to do anything is because that's what the best version of you would do. That's because it ought to be done, because nobody else is going to do it, you know? And so anyway, that developed, and at this point I was just in a really good spot. And so long story, I started thinking about what I was going to do when I went home. And I knew that now I was just like full blown in sobriety. I was on fire for like, I had started to have a couple guys come to me in private, like gangsters, and be like, yo, Mark, I want to change my life too. And it was, dude, I swear, it was so hard up until that point. It was so hard. I had a couple mantras that I developed over the years, but I would be like doing things like I would go out to the yard and I would just run laps in the yard, and I would run and I would run and I would run. And I would say to myself, this is what makes the difference between you and them. This is what makes the difference between you and them. I would stay in my cell and I'd be reading all day, and guys would walk by and say stuff to me, and I'd just be like, this is what makes the difference between you and them. And then when that first guy came to me and was like, yo, Mark, I want to change my life too, that changed my life, because I can't even explain how good that felt, how encouraging that was. And I was like, yo, bro, come to AA with me. Like, I'm going tonight. Like, so I knew that I just wanted to help people. I had started to like, I had this gratitude practice that I always felt so grateful that God spared me. I would think about Jared and Kyle and Travis and all these kids that did the same thing that I did but died. Or I would think about these guys that I was around, that I knew 90% of them are going to spend the rest of their life in and out of prison. Like and I'm like, you know, I just didn't feel like I deserved God's grace. Like, I didn't feel like I deserved to have the level head that I had, to be sober, to be alive. Like, and so anyway, this indebtedness led me to think, man, when I go home from prison, I just want to contribute. Like, I kind of feel like I got to repay this debt. I got to contribute to other people's lives in a positive way. And hopefully someday will be deserving of this second chance that I got. And what I really wanted to do was help people mentally, emotionally, like with the mental health stuff, because that's really what I felt like the journey that I had gone on and that I was on. But I was like, man, I don't like school. I don't want to go to college. I'm not good for college. So for me, the progression of my journey went, I started taking care of myself physically, and then I started taking care of myself mentally and emotionally, and then I developed a spiritual relationship. So it was physical, mental, emotional, then spiritual. So I was like, maybe I can just help people trigger that chain reaction. I can just help people. I'll become a personal trainer, and I'll just teach them like the discipline, the work ethic, the delayed gratification, the sense of self-worth, the confidence, all these things just through fitness. That's what happened for me. And so I had my family send me the books that I would need to study in order to take a personal training certification. And I read them cover to cover. I read them, and I went home from prison pretty much ready to sit and take the personal training exam. So I have I obviously can't, I could talk about my whole prison experience for hours and hours and hours, because, I spent 5.5 years there. But I have 3 stories that I do think are very significant that I should share. Okay. So one is, I'll say is, I mentioned earlier that like after I left my parents' house, I really didn't speak to them for a long time. And I probably spoke to them, I don't know, less than 5 times between 16 when I left their house and when I went to prison. And then even for like the first year, like my parents didn't visit me. We didn't talk for like, I don't know, like a year, maybe more. And I don't know how long it was, but when my parents finally came and visited me for the first time, I was kind of like nervous. Like I was like, like I didn't know what to expect. It was my first time facing them. Like they weren't at court or anything, like when I got sentenced. Mm-hmm. So I get down to the visit, and in New York, like when people visit you, they have the opportunity to bring you like stuff, like gifts, like food and clothes and books and things like that. Things that are on an approved list, right? And so you don't know that until after you get out. But I wasn't expecting any of that. So my parents came, and I get in there, and we sit down, and we have this amazing visit. Like, this is when I'm still bad. I'm being bad. We have this amazing visit, and it was like nothing happened. It was like they acted like I had never done all those terrible things that I had done to them. Like I literally physically abused my parents. I said the worst things to them. I left when I was 16 and didn't speak to them. When I went on the run, I purposely didn't tell them where I was because I wanted them to think I was dead. Like I did so many bad, hurtful things to them on purpose. And I rejected them for years. And they had never done anything but pour into me. And they showed up that day and they act like I never did any of it. They're just catching up. We're just catching up. They didn't bring up the charges. They didn't bring up nothing. And I went back to my housing unit that day. And then I left the visit. And they were like, hey, Joe, you got a package. They maxed out the amount of stuff they could bring me. Brought me T-shirts and underwear and things like that. And I went back and I remember I cried and I cried and I cried. And it was because that was the first time in my life that I realized what unconditional love was. Like I remember thinking it. Like it didn't matter what I did. It didn't matter. They were gonna show up like that. It was crazy. It's still crazy to me to think about.
Yeah. I think it was the first time you allowed yourself to receive it.
It was the first time. It was the first time I ever allowed myself to receive it.
Yeah. How beautiful though that some two strangers who weren't your biological parents could love another person like that.
It's incredible. We can choose it.
Yeah.
I let love be one of my driving things now because you can choose it. You really can. You can just choose to love unconditionally. Mm-hmm. And they did. And it was it was so earth-shattering for me to realize. The second thing is just something that will give us a picture of like sort of what my road was like as far as the violence and the interaction. So when I beat up the big homie, they moved me to a different housing unit. They didn't send me to the box immediately. I was in a particularly violent prison. And so like a fist fight really wasn't that big of a deal there, unfortunately. And so they were like, okay, you don't need to go to the box for this, just move. But that was bad news for me. The worst possible scenario was me staying in that jail because everybody knew that I was the guy that beat up the big homie. And so they moved me to this different housing unit, and I show up, and the first thing I did was go to the bathroom because in prison, there's no cameras in the bathroom. That's the only place. So that's where you fight. That's where you do all the stuff. So I went to the bathroom, and I called the Bloods in the house in there, and I was like, let's do it. Like, if you got, like let's just, like, I know you guys have to jump me. Like, let's just do it now. Like, let's fight. And they were like, no, we're going to go to the yard. We're going to talk to the homies. We're going to figure it out, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, okay. I don't know why I did that. I should have just popped on them right there. But I go in, and I'm so arrogant at the time because I am tough. And in New York, a lot of the guys that are like the gangsters, they're from New York City. And in New York City, you didn't grow up how I grew up. And I grew up in the country where you fist fight. You grew up in New York City where you shoot guns. But you don't have guns in here. And I'm tough. You're not, And so that's the attitude I had my whole bid. And so I go back onto my bunk bed. Mind you, we're not in cells in this prison. We're in a housing unit where there's just bed. And I go into my bunk bed. I'm on the top bunk, and I just go to sleep because I was just arrogant. Mm-hmm. And I woke up to a guy that had a makeshift knife on my throat. To this day, I have a scar that goes.
You need to show it to the camera.
I mean, no offense, Jack, but these cameras ain't picking that up. But I have a scar from the corner of my cheek, like back below, but behind my ear.
Put a picture in.
Yeah, we can put a picture in. But I have a scar, and it's because right when he was about to slit my throat, I literally turned my head, and then as I turned my head, another guy, not the guy that had the knife, another guy pushed me off the top bunk into the next cube. Over there was two guys waiting. They had picture like a tube sock. You drop a padlock in the tube sock, tie the end of it, and then that way when you swing it, it has some velocity. They had padlocks in tube socks, and they beat the shit out of me with that. And to this day, that's why my back is messed up, because one of them hit me right on the spine. And so I'm fighting my way out of this, and I go, the CO's sleeping because it's the middle of the night, and I like kind of go out and into the common area, and eventually the CO sees what's going on and pulls the pin, and we all, chill. So that's how I got this scar. And sometimes people see it and they ask, and that was just one example. Like there was another time where a dude smashed me over the head with they're like payphones in prison. That's how I have a scar up here that people can't see because it's in my hair. Just plenty of crazy.
You got stabbed?
Yeah, I got stabbed in the side. And so yeah, it was just nuts. So that was the prison environment. Like I don't want to give anybody any delusion that like it was like cushy. And then even after I started to change my life, that beating up the big homie almost came to haunt me, because I ended up in another prison after this incident and I was in the housing unit with another big homie. And at first they didn't know who I was, but then the big homie that I beat up came to the same jail, and he told everybody, hey, that's the guy. And this is where earlier when I said I've risked my life to stay the course, the big homie in this second facility, he like calls me into the laundry room, and in the laundry room is no good. This is where they kill people. Calls me into the laundry room, and this dude is actually tough. He's not like the guy that I beat up. He's actually tough, and he stabs people. He does he gives no cares. He calls me in. Mind you, I'd probably been there for a year now. People knew me. I gained a lot of respect for being who I was and how I was, even from the gangsters. He calls me into the laundry room, and he's like, yo, Santana just pulled up? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm shaking, because like their blood code is like, if you touch that guy, we all have to, your food is what they call you. I'm shaking. And he's like, I just want you to know, like, I know you, I've lived with you. If you did what they say you did, then he must have been really out of line, because like I know you. And he's like, as long as you're here in this facility, nothing's going to happen to you. And like, it just doesn't happen. Like that doesn't happen. It was like by the grace of God. Like they don't care if you felt justified. Like, you know what I mean? But he was like, dude, I see you. You're a good dude.
Yeah, your actions, that's just, it shows how powerful living a life.
Because you know what I was thinking?
See.
I wasn't necessarily scared that, that was a life or death situation. It could have easily been. But that's not even what I was thinking. I was thinking, man, I just worked so hard to earn my good time. I'm getting ready to go home. This right here is going to make me do more time. Like whatever happens in this laundry room, I'm staying in prison. I'm not going home. I was like hopeful. I was like months away from going home. And I walked into that laundry room thinking like it's over. But I had to face it. And I did, and nothing happened, and it was amazing. Like it was just a glimpse of God's grace in that moment. And so that was one. And then you mentioned earlier, there was a very transformational exercise that I did that I have to share with people, because there's so many people out there that are just, again, their past or a traumatic experience that they had is literally eating them alive. It is causing them to take their whole life for granted. It's holding them hostage the same way that Travis dying was holding me hostage. And so one night, for whatever reason, I decided that I was going to write a letter to my brother as if I had one more chance to have a conversation with him. Like if I could talk to Travis one more time, what would I say? And I stayed up. It was probably midnight. And I stayed up till the middle of the night, long after everybody had gone to sleep. My little lamp was on. It was just me up. And I'm sitting there writing in my journal, talking to Travis, and I'm bawling. I'm crying like a baby. But it was so therapeutic. And I swear the next morning I woke up and I felt like a totally different person. I felt like a weight had been lifted off of me because I was holding that in for so long. And I just
basically have those journals?
I still have it, yeah. And I basically said, like, dude, I forgive you. It's okay. Like, I forgive you. I love you. I miss you, man. I wish you could be here. But, like, and it was so therapeutic. And so those are the three, realizing what unconditional love really was and like, accepting it. There's people in your life that love you unconditionally, that are just there always. You could do the worst thing ever, and you could be so ashamed of yourself, and you walk out in front of them and they'll act like nothing happened, and they'll accept you back with open arms. We gotta recognize those people and keep them close to us. The standing, I've learned over and over and over and over and over and over and over again that you have to stand up for, if you don't, it's this stupid cheesy saying, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. You have to stand up for what you believe in. But specifically, once you identify what the best version of you looks like, you just have to be fiercely committed to being that person in every moment. And sometimes, even if it means staring death in the face and saying, you know what, if I die in this situation, at least I stood for what I believed in. That sounds extreme and it sounds crazy, but I've done it multiple times, and it's produced this level of conviction that I feel. I don't live for anybody else's expectations. I don't try to please anybody else. I do what I feel called to do. I do my best moment to moment. I show up how I hope that the best version of me would show up moment to moment. And yeah, I don't do that perfectly, but I stay committed to that concept no matter what it costs. It can cost me a job. It can cost me the approval of friends. It can cost me my life if it has to, but I stay firm. And I have this conviction that people can perceive. They can feel it. I don't care what you think.
Yeah.
And that comes from those experiences in there. And then not only that, but we've gone through cancel culture here at the shop. People say all kinds of crazy things about me, and they try to peer pressure me into apologizing or saying that things that are going on in society are okay, or accepting untruth as not true. If I was willing to stand up for what I believed in when my life was on the line, do you think you could peer pressure me into being or accepting something that I don't believe in? No. You can't. Like, that's what's happening out there. It's that people have never, they lack conviction in their truth and in what they believe in, because their conviction they've never been tested and passed the test. But guys, I don't know. Anyway.
You have this saying that you say, standards are standards. And I think
that's right.
I think that when you take the time, and I'm still working on this personally, but like, you do a great job of setting standards for yourself and holding yourself to those standards. And I think that that's really helped you come up with an unshakable sense of identity within yourself. And that no matter what, and I think that this has only been fortified by your relationship with Christ, in the sense of, like, you know who you are, because you show up in that way. You know who you are in Christ, and nothing that anybody says will disprove the truth that you know in your head, because you set that standard. If you let other people set the standard of who you are, then you're going to fall, because you're constantly living up to, like, these standards that are moving this target that, like, is constantly in different places. Like, you cannot possibly meet all of those things. But when you know who your identity is in Christ, when you know who your identity is because you choose to show up in that way, and you say, nope, this is who I am, and this is how I live, then, like, when people say these things to you or about you, it's like it doesn't matter. Like, it's just like,
you say whatever you want. Yeah. That's 1,000%, and I appreciate that. It's a compliment. And I'm imperfect in that process, but I am trying. So fast forward now. Then I come home from prison. Okay, I wanted to share those three stories because, prison, again, I could tell a million stories from prison. But those three were really impactful. I find myself circling back to those in settings like the men's group or when I'm on a podcast or something like that. I always tell those stories because they're huge for me. So then I come home from prison. And I have absolutely nothing. I went to prison 19. I come home when I'm 25, and I have to start my life over completely from scratch. I have no money. I have no friends. I have no clothes. I have no shoes. I have no possessions. I have no furniture. I have nothing. I move into my parents' house. My parents live in this dinky tiny house, less than 1,000 square feet. They have this little tiny bedroom that my, I think, 6-year-old niece, I don't know, 10-year-old niece, I don't know. My niece was staying in. So I stay in my niece's room, because she didn't stay there. They just had a room for my niece. So I'm staying in my niece's room with all this like princess material and all this stuff. And I have to figure out what I'm going to do. Fortunately, I studied for the personal training certification before I came home. I knew that I liked fitness. I wanted to get into fitness. I wanted to help people. I wanted to help people really find all of the things that I got from a fitness journey, like confidence and a sense of self-worth and discipline and all these things. And, getting into the fitness space felt like the lowest barrier to entry. It felt like the easiest way to actually help people. So I sat for the personal training certification. And I do kind of want to just fast forward, because a lot of this stuff now is stuff that I have already talked about a lot. But I started my first business. It grew pretty quickly. And about a year into my business, I had my own gym. It was about 3,000 square feet. I was making 5 figures a month. So I went from nothing to making 5 figures a month take home. And I was, and really, I can't take all the credit. I was listening to this podcast. It was called the MFCEO Project. This guy, Andy Frisella, that's from St. Louis, that ended up being the reason that I came here. He had this podcast. It was a business entrepreneurship podcast that I would listen to. Mind you, I didn't go to college. I had no formal business experience. I just sold drugs. And
that's a good clip right there.
Yeah. And so here I am trying to build a business. I don't know anything that I'm doing. So I would listen to this guy's podcast, and I would go and I would apply what I learned in the episode, and it would work. And then I would listen again, and I would go apply it again, and I would listen again, and I would go apply it again. And before I know it, I'm making 5 figures a month. I'm making more money than I ever made, and it's legal.
How did you find the podcast in the first place?
I don't even know. And so it's God, but and so I'm doing that. Mind you, I never told a soul that I had gone to prison. None of these, my parents lived in a different area than they lived before I went to prison. So nobody knew me out there. I never told anybody. And I have all these clients now that are coming to my gym. I'm working with them one-on-one. Everybody thinks I'm this amazing guy. So one of the lessons that I learned from that was any given day, and I did this intentionally, but any given day, you can literally decide to show up as somebody completely different than the person you've been up until that point. Any given day, if you're ashamed of who you've been, if you're not happy with who you've been, if you're not proud of who you've been, you can think, okay, well, you can just create a different version of yourself in your head and be like, all right, I'm going to show up like that guy tomorrow. And if I show up like that guy, then I'll be proud of who I am. If I show up like that guy, whatever. And so I knew that. And it occurred to me that I'm going to meet more people in my life than I have met up until this point. And so if I do a good enough job of just showing up, everybody that I meet today, the version that I've been in the past literally doesn't even exist to them. That version of me is gone if I just stay committed to the version of me that I am now.
It's so interesting because obviously I met you after you had been to prison. Many, many people at the coffee shop have met you and have a hard time even believing.
That's right.
that you've gone to prison when you tell them.
Yeah.
You tell them.
That's how powerful that concept is.
Yeah.
Is that if you just commit to the new version of you, that old version of you literally doesn't exist. And then when people find out, like, oh, you went to prison, they literally can't believe it. They cannot even imagine that version of me was real. And so I felt, for whatever reason, I started to feel called to talk about the things that I've been through, to just take an active role in the discussion that was happening. And I had reached out to a company, local St. Louis company, First Form, and I had applied to be one of their independent sales reps. I was selling their supplements in my gym, and I had this point of contact that was here. And I called her, and I was like, hey, and mind you, I was doing really well with them. And I was like, hey, I just feel called to like share my story. And she didn't even know at this point. So I was like, I just want to like tell you first. Legitimately, I was scared that when she heard, she was going to be like, hey, we can't have you associate with our company, and like basically kick me out. So I tell her basically, hey, I just came home from prison. I've only been home from prison for like a year. And I really just want to start talking about it and being honest. And I wanted to be honest with you first and give you a chance to like cut ties with me before I do it, so I don't make the company look bad. Like, the company is owned by the guy that I felt really grateful for, Andy Frisella, right? Because he's the one that taught me how to build a business. So I get done telling her, and she was just silent for a minute, and she was like, Mark, so you've only been home from prison for a year. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, how in the world did you accomplish so much in such a short amount of time? I don't understand. Like, your business is trying. And nobody had ever asked me that question before, and I didn't know what to say, but it occurred to me. I was like, I don't know. I just don't waste any days. And that concept is so powerful. It sounds so simple, but there was a time when I was in prison, I would sit every day on my bed and I would just look out the window and I would daydream about what I would do with my days when I finally had a chance to choose what I did with my days. And I made a commitment to it. I said, when I go home I wasted so many days sitting on my bed in prison. And I'm like, when I go home, I'm not wasting another day. I'm never going to waste another day. And I would think about it. I'm going to build this business. I'm going to go be active in the community. I'm going to do all these things. And what I observed, like when you're in prison, you're looking at society from the outside looking in. So what I observed was like in prison, you wake up in the morning, you kind of go, you eat breakfast, you go to work. You go to your program. That's work. You go to work. You get a lunch break. You go back for lunch. Then you go back to work. And then you come back to your housing unit, you watch TV, you gamble, you entertain yourself until bedtime, you go to sleep, you wake up, you do it again, okay? What I observed was that my mom was living in the exact same routine that I was. And she was free. She would wake up, eat breakfast, go to work, come home for lunch, eat lunch, go back to work, come home, watch Netflix. We had Netflix in prison. Watch Netflix, until it was bedtime, go to bed, wake up, do it again. Yeah. And that realization, I'm like, these people, society, not individuals, most of society is voluntarily imprisoning themselves in this routine. They're living in the same exact routine that I was living in prison. And so I made that commitment. When I go home, I'm going to live. I'm not going to waste a single mother-loving day.
What does that look like, though?
Hold on. And so when I came home, what it is just pouring into yourself, living in what you feel called to do. Like, another thing that I think about is like, we spend more time working in our life than we do anything else. We spend more time working than we do sleeping. We spend more time working than we do with our family. We spend more time working than we do with our significant other. And so many people will settle for a job that they hate, and they'll work it for 20, 30, 40 years just so they, and be like, oh, well, it's good enough that I enjoy the rest of my life. No. Like, what do you mean? No, I'm not doing that. You can make money doing literally anything. Why would you do anything that you didn't enjoy doing? Why would you spend a day working? You can, And that doesn't mean you're going to enjoy your job all the time, but you should generally enjoy and have an interest in what you do.
Purposeful or satisfied or
And so that was another thing. Like I watched my dad do that. And so anyway, I come home and not wasting any days looks like this is where I want to be. This is a formula that has been so powerful for me, so powerful. As I ask myself, where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years? Or what does the best version of me look like? And then I will reverse engineer. And the question that I ask myself, it's not like some formula. I ask myself a simple question. Well, if this is where I want to end up, right? Our life and our circumstances, who we are, is just a product of our habits, rituals, and routines. It's brick by brick by brick. It's action by action by action. Cumulatively, inch by inch, over time, you cover the distance, right? So I ask myself, if this is where I want to be in 5 years or 10 years or 1 year or 6 months, what can I do today? What can I do today to get a little bit closer? Like, think about this. Simple analogy that most people will understand. If you want to be an influencer, if you want to grow your Instagram to 100,000 followers, well, you ask yourself, well, what can I do today? Well, you can post. You can't grow without posting. You can post something today. Like, that's a simple, because you said, what does that look like? That's what it looked like. Every day I was so hungry. I would wake up and be like, all right, I want to help all these people. I want to change their life. I want all these clients to win. They're going to change their life, and they're going to, and I'll be like, okay, but what can I do today? What can I do today to grow the business? What can I do today to get a new client? What can I do today to help my clients go get a little bit better? What can I do today to learn more, to be more equipped for where I want to go? And I would just do it, and I would execute every day. I lived for the plan because I was living on purpose. I was living on the path that I felt called to be on. It was fulfilling. I enjoyed it. People would be like, Mark, why don't you take a vacation? Why don't you take a weekend off? Why don't you take a break? Because I'm living a life that I don't need a break from. I don't need to take a break. I to this day, people say that to me. I don't need to take a break. I don't feel like I need a break from the life that I built this life on purpose. Why would I take a break from it? And so that's what I did. And I built the business, and she, long story short, was like, it's cool. I think it's awesome. You should talk about it. So I started talking about it. My Instagram started growing. People started following along. And I ended up moving to St. Louis to work for that company. And that's how I ended up here.
And you met me,
the love
of your life.
And then I met you.
And then you opened a coffee shop, and now we're here.
That's right. Yeah, no, for real. No, that's the long and short of it. Now, and then the rest is history. You guys know me from that point forward. And so, yeah, I really appreciate, if you guys listen this long, I really appreciate you sticking with me, and I really appreciate, all the support, for real. Like and everything that I committed to in those early stages of like my lifestyle transformation, I'm still committed to. Like, I still live with that looming sense of indebtedness. I still feel like I owe. I still show up every day like I owe. I still have that gratitude pride. I still am talking to God every day. I'm still grateful. Yeah, so I'm just grateful that you guys are here. I hope that above all, really, I hope that when you hear this story, that the overwhelming takeaway is like, well, shoot, man, if Mark is Mark, and I follow Mark, I listen to Mark's podcast, I look up to Mark, he became a person that I value and that I look up to, then I can become a person of value. I can become a role. I can become somebody that contributes to the world in a positive way, no matter what you've gone through. Because despite it all, I'm here, and you're listening to my podcast right now. So if that's the case, then you can do literally anything that you set your mind to. Anything that you're willing to sacrifice and work for, you can do. And then the other thing is that life is meant to be lived. You are likely stuck in the same cycle that my mom was stuck in when I referenced earlier. You are likely one of those people that's likely by statistics, by pure statistics. That's what I mean. I'm not accusing you, but by pure statistics, you are likely to be one of those people that's living in this zombie autopilot of life. You're just going through the motions. You're voluntarily imprisoning yourself instead of actually living and saying, if I could do anything today, what would if I could do anything today, you know what I would have been doing? This. That's what for real. Every day, me and Grace had this conversation recently. I said, Grace, every day, it's not like I'm like, oh, we're already a year in. I can't quit now. That's never my thought. Every day on an individual day basis, day by day, I wake up in the morning and I choose this all over again. I say, man, is this the life? Yeah, this is the life I want to live. This is the mountain I want to climb. This is the community I want to build. This is the path I want to walk. This is the woman I want to spend my life in. These are the people that I want to spend my life on. Every day, every aspect of my life, I wake up and I choose it again. If that's not what you're doing, I don't want to say you're doing it wrong. But I'm happy.
Yeah, I think
I'm happy. I've found peace. I've found gratitude. Not every moment is a good moment, but I look around and I think it's the exception, not the rule, that people are actually happy. I've figured out something because I am happy. And I want that so bad for other people. And I think that that's a big part of it, is waking up every day. And this is also why I'm willing to make drastic changes in my life when I need to. If I wake up any given day and be like, you know what, Jack, that ain't my kind of guy anymore. I have to. As soon as I stop choosing something, it's out of my life. And I don't. It's not like vindictive. It's not like I'm better or I'm too good for that anymore. It's you only get one shot at this. You get one life. Like you get one chance to live. You should enjoy every moment. You should value the people that are around you. You should value yourself. You should invest in yourself. Like, I'm so infinitely curious about this question. What am I capable of? What am I capable of? What could I accomplish if I tried? Well, there's only one way to find out. Like, and then what's the alternative? Like, to sit here and just be like content with the progress that I've made thus far? Like, what would life look like if you didn't like constantly, I don't know. And so those are some of the things that I hope that you end up ruminating about after listening to this, because those are some of the things that, some of the questions that I asked myself that turned into like a life that I feel really, really grateful to live,
I just want to compliment you on your intentionality and your drive. I don't think I've ever met a more driven person than you. It's crazy. It actually intimidates me quite a bit. I used to think of myself as like, I used to compete with you in my head. Like I would like,
Good
yeah,
luck.
well, I know. Well, then I drove myself crazy, and it's not like that I'm incapable, but like in a really romantic relationship setting, and that's just not necessarily the mentality that you want to have. I've realized that I was just barking up the wrong tree, but it's so impressive, and it does like intimidate me still a little bit to this day of like, man, it's just being in the presence of someone who has such high standards and such a strong identity of self. Like, it's
crazy
me
too.
Like, I mean, it makes me want to level up in that way. Like it's very intentional that I choose to spend my time around people like you. And you specifically have been very intentional about surrounding yourself with people who are high performers also. But it's crazy. It's crazy to see like how your brain works. I'm always very amazed at like the things that you think of and the things that you focus on and like the questions that you ask yourself, because I know that things like, waking up and choosing every day seem very, I don't want to say normal, but like normal to you now that you've practiced it so much. But like that's like, I don't think that crosses the mind of 99.9% of people. Like you're just so intentional, and I really admire that about you. Like everything that you do has a purpose, and you're very like thoughtful, and whereas like I tend to just go throughout the day a lot of times and like just move. Like I'm like, okay, what's next? Like everything that you do has thought and purpose behind it. So I think that's really cool, and I think it's cool that you share that, you know, with people, and you kind of dive into your thought process, because it's very complex but it's valuable. So I'm glad that you said that.
Well, I appreciate it, and I just want to like highlight, like, when you say your drive, like, I've never met a more driven, but I'm not driven to be successful. Like, I don't want anybody to like you know, kind of like assume, like, I'm not driven. It's impact over everything.
Yeah.
It's I swear, I say this to Jack all the time. If the mission was the only thing that mattered, well, how would you do it? Like, that's really how I think. It's impact over everything. Like, I'm so hungry. I'm desperate to, like, I feel like I'm saving lives. Mm-hmm. Like, if I lived, like, you know what? When my mom died, I'm more at peace. My mom lived to be almost 60. My brother died when he was 24. I'm more at peace with my brother dying at 24 than I am with my mom dying at 60, because when I came home, I was flying home, I was in the airport, and all I could think about was like, yeah, she died, but did she live? Like, did she live while she was here? And the answer is unequivocally no. She didn't. My mom struggled her whole life. She lived for everybody else. She was a people pleaser. She didn't take care of herself physically. She was morbidly obese my entire life, 300 plus pounds. She worked, workaholic once she got sober, but could never get ahead, died in debt, never took a vacation, didn't live at all. My brother died at 24. This man, spur of the moment, jumped into a rodeo and rode a fucking bull, a real bull, okay? Used to go hunting on people's, you know, illegally in cornfields and stuff all the time just to have fun, had dogs, snowboarded, mountain climbed. Like, this man went and bought a motorcycle, a Harley, because he thought it was badass. No motorcycle license, never driven a motorcycle before. He's just ripping around, like, you know, just, he lived. Played soccer as an adult. He would go and hacky sack and play bongo drums. He would go fishing. This man lived a life to the fullest and then died. He died, but he lived. My mom lived almost 3 times as long, and she didn't live. She didn't live at all. And so I'm so desperate to, like, pull people, to wake them up, to activate them. Ask yourself the meaningful questions. Do the work, right? Like, live intentional. It's. Your life's going to suck if you don't. And it might suck if you do. It might suck if you do. It's going to be hard. Like, nothing that I've done has been easy. Building Omen has been so hard. Every time somebody asks me, oh, how's it going? It's fucking hard. That's how it's going. It's very hard. But, like, there's a chance that it could be way better. Yeah, I know you're waiting for that. And so, yeah, man, it's not drive to be successful. I am not driven at all by, you know, the reward. The reward is seeing people's life. My first tweet ever on Twitter was, and it's still up, I love it, I go back and look at it sometimes. The real flex is knowing how many people's lives are a little bit better because of you.
Yeah.
So anyway, guys, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for all the time that you invest in listening to the show. For anybody that supports Omen here in St. Louis or from afar, I'm grateful for you guys listening, and yeah, talk to you next time.
See you later.